All right, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. My name is Ian Rowe, Senior Fellow at AEI, where I study the factors that drive upward mobility, most notably the four free pillars of family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. Thank you for joining us on what should be a powerful discussion as we explore new pathways for teachers in the age of school choice. Whether you are here in person or watching the live stream, we look forward to engaging you as an active participant in today's event and discussion. We're holding this event today because after years of struggle for educational freedom, we are at the dawn of a new era for school choice. Texas just joined the fray with what could be one of the nation's largest choice programs, funded at $1 billion in the first year. That means almost 100,000 students will be able to receive scholarships. Indeed, according to EdChoice, at least 33 states now have some form of publicly funded private school options, whether it be vouchers, education savings accounts, tax credit scholarships. 12 states offer universal eligibility regardless of family income, and 45 states have some version of charter school laws. Now, before we declare victory, we certainly do not have a universal choice environment across the country. And in places like my home state in New York, we are constantly fighting an existential battle against anti-choice forces. So there is work still to be done. In fact, just yesterday, Wire Points reported that last year in Illinois, not a single child tested proficient in math in 80 schools. For reading, it was 24 schools. And the kicker is that on average, these schools are still graduating about 70% of students. What I find interesting is that while school choice is primarily focused on liberating students and families from educational systems that have been failing their community for generations, school choice is also about fulfilling the demand for teachers that want more options themselves, especially in their preparation. Now, why would that be? Well, let's just take one example. It is still the case that pedagogy of the oppressed remains one of the single most assigned books in teacher education programs. Not all teachers, particularly those who do not see themselves as social justice warriors, want that type of indoctrination. Indeed, many teachers aren't happy with traditional teacher development nor school structures and are looking for alternative pathways for the environments in which they teach. And some states are beginning to take matters in their own hand. As an example, Tennessee has pioneered a new way to develop teacher pipelines and was the first state to be approved by the Department of Labor to establish a permanent grow your own model, with a school district partnering with a state university's teacher residency program, becoming the first registered apprenticeship program for teaching in the country. And as we will hear today, new school types are emerging that require different preparation, especially given the growth of micro schools, classical schools, religious schools, hybrid homeschooling, etc. The question for today is whether or not our teacher development apparatus is prepared for this type of new demand. We have an all-star lineup, starting with my AEI colleague, Robert Pondischio, who will shortly provide a keynote. Next, Daniel Copeland, James Schulz, and Patrick Wolf will join Erin Valdez to discuss higher education's role in preparing teachers. Then Krista DeBoer, Matthew Kramer, and Kelly Smith will join me to discuss alternative pathways for teacher preparation. Following each panel, there'll be a 10 to 15-minute Q&A where we'll have a microphone for you, and if you're online, please just email joe.pitts, that's Pitts, at aei.org, or hashtag AEI Teacher Prep on X. Let me close by saying that I joined this conversation not only as a senior fellow at AEI, but also as a practitioner, someone who was at Teach for America in the very early days, to now someone who has for the last 15 years founded and run public charter schools in the Bronx, New York. I've had the honor of leading public schools at the pre-K level, elementary, middle, and high school, and most recently founded Vertex Partnership Academies, a virtues-based international baccalaureate public charter high school in the Soundview section of the Bronx. And even though I quibble that principals and school leaders do not get their sufficient due as being as crucial to student outcomes, I do agree with the often cited data point that teacher quality is the most important in-school factor influencing student achievement. Over the last 15 years, our schools hired more than 1,000 teachers, faculty from every race, economic class, men, women, for knowledge-rich schools, for inquiry-based schools, the full gamut. As I reflect on what were the common elements we looked for in teachers, I think of a three-legged stool. First, subject matter knowledge. Second, pedagogical capacity. And third, a willingness to take feedback. So basically, do you know your stuff? Do you have the ability to teach it? And are you able to listen in the inevitable moments that kids are not learning under your instruction? While each of these remain necessary, they are increasingly insufficient in the current environment that is demanding more from teachers and the institutions that prepare them, and the increasing variety of schools that want to hire them. To shed more light on this topic, it's my pleasure to introduce my fellow AEI colleague, Robert Mondischio, who is part of the AEI's James Q. Wilson program in K-12 education studies, where he focuses on K-12 education, curriculum, teaching and school choice and charter schools. And I strongly encourage everyone to read your latest Substack, The Next 30 Years, Robert Mondischio.
Thank you, Ian. Let me tell you the story of how I almost invented the micro school. In 2002, I became a fifth grade teacher in New York City. Excuse me. I'd come from a 20-year career in the news business. Teaching was going to be my 2-year mid-career public service do-gooder stint. It was not supposed to be my second career. So I was teaching at PS 277 in the South Bronx, not far from Ian's school. Literally the lowest scoring school in New York City's lowest scoring school district. Only about 1 out of 6 of the kids in my class could read on grade level, even by the debased standards of the tests at that time. So I was utterly naive about education policy 25 years ago. But at some point I became aware that every single kid sitting in front of me in my class of 30 was costing the taxpayers of the city and state of New York about $30,000 a year to sit in my classroom. The city was paying me about $36,000 a year. I was absolutely gobsmacked when I learned this. I remember thinking to myself, holy hell, forgive me. I probably thought something worse. Give me 6 of those kids, any 6, you pick them. I'll pick them up in the morning, I'll bring them to my apartment, I'll teach them all day, I'll make them lunch. I'll do it for $25,000 a kid. And if they don't pass their state tests, it's free. I'll save the taxpayers money. My upside is $150,000. I was this close to being Kelly Smith and founding Prenda. By the way, in 1991, I was working at Time Magazine with its nascent online efforts, and I had the idea that it would be really a great idea to sell books on the internet. I don't like to talk about that one, however. It's just too painful. Anyway, what I intuited, hire a teacher to work with a small number of students in someone's home, came to fruition less in micro schools than with so-called pandemic pods several years later, scrappy parent-driven experiments that sprang up when kids shuttered during COVID. a handful of families, suffering from Zoom fatigue, and the soul-crushing limits of remote learning banded together to form these tiny learning pods, bespoke learning groups, if you like, often in a living room or someone's backyard, guided by a hired teacher, plucky parent, a mix of both, tackling everything from algebra to art projects. A year into the pandemic, The New Yorker, which, as I'm sure you know, no friend of school choice, was predicting that pandemic pods would outlast COVID and acknowledging their benefits. Pods, they said, showed us what's possible when parents take the reins, demanding flexibility and results. That's a wake-up call for education, that it can be nimble, personal, and effective, but only if we're willing to rethink who gets a seat at the table. So today's discussion, New Teacher Pathways in the Age of School Choice, takes place at a moment when the relationship between Americans and their schools is in play to a degree that I don't think any of us could have imagined pre-COVID. It set in motion, obviously, a bewildering amount of change in a very, very short amount of time. Public schools are a basic bedrock government service. When they become unreliable or unavailable for weeks, months, even years at a time, habits change. That's not a surprise. And then they stick. So rates of homeschooling are what? Triple what they were before the pandemic. Private schools, charter schools, online schools, micro schools have all added students, while traditional students have lost students. So for years as well, the American classroom has been a kind of a black box. Remote learning during COVID pried that black box open and broadcast lessons directly onto the kitchen tables of Americans all across the country. Parents were not always happy with what they were seeing. We've had fights over masking children, over critical race theory, over gender ideology, social and emotional learning, on and on and on. That's already a long list of grievances before, obviously, NAEP and 2 decades of growth wiped away at a stroke. So it is clearly no longer taken for granted or surprising that the local public school is no longer the only game in town. Parents are increasingly inclined to ask a very fundamental question. Is this school the best that I can do for my child? And if not, what else is out there, and how do I get it? The days when most of us just accepted the default assignment of a local geographically zoned public school, those days are clearly over. So last month, I wrote a piece for the recently relaunched American Enterprise magazine, which I titled The Last Days of Public School. I argued that we may be witnessing the twilight of public education as most of us have known it, not because public schools will vanish, but because the monopoly they've held is crumbling. Universal school choice, empowered by policies like Education Savings Account, is decentralizing education, giving families unprecedented control over where and how their children learn. The percentage of kids attending a geographically zoned district-run school will simply never again be what it once was. Texas, as Ian mentioned, is poised to become the latest and largest state to adopt ESAs. When that happens, consider this, at least half of American families will now have the power to opt out of their traditional public school system and take the lion's share of the money with them. That shift obviously has important implications for parents and students, but it's likely to be equally transformative for teachers. The teaching profession, which has long been tethered to the public school monopoly and geographically zoned schools, is simply going to have to adapt to a world where education is pluralistic, entrepreneurial, and increasingly unbundled. So let's consider for a few minutes what this means and how we recruit, train, and retain teachers. Well, it will not surprise you to hear me say that schools of education, by and large, are failing our teachers, and then by extension, our kids. My colleague Daniel Buck has described his ed school experience making Black Lives Matter friendship bracelets, attending classes that sounded like group therapy sessions, and completing assignments in graduate school consisting of acrostic poems and rap videos. His experience mirrored mine 20 years ago. I still, to this day, have a vocabulary book that I made in ed school out of construction paper, glue, and pictures cut out of magazines. I got an A each time I submitted it, in 3 different classes. So for years, I have joked somewhat darkly that if we trained air traffic controllers the way we train teachers right now, well, students would write papers about the structural inequalities or inequities in transportation. They would work on developing their personal philosophy of air travel. Landing planes, oh, that's something you learn on the job. We're not here to train you. Worse, when they got on the job, we'd tell them very condescendingly, look, kid, everyone crashes a plane their first year on the job. You think you're the only one? Hey, that guy over there crashed 3 planes his first year. Don't worry, it gets better. So perhaps the next piece I write should be called The Last Days of Ed School, because in an age of school choice, their monopoly and the stranglehold they enjoy over teacher certification and entry into the profession is equally endangered, if not more so. So teachers will need to be prepared for diverse settings, charters, microschools, homeschool co-ops, even virtual platforms. The skills required to succeed in this bespoke education, family-driven education market will be very different than those in standardized or in standard public schools. Teachers will need to be entrepreneurial, adaptable, responsible to the unique needs of students and their families. They may not be teachers at all, how we currently conceive of teachers. More on that in a moment. So how do we rethink teacher training to meet these demands? Should we require practical experience over teaching credentials? And how do we ensure quality without stifling innovation? Let me be clear, the world is not waiting for us to answer the questions that we're tackling today. A year or so ago in Arizona, I spoke to a gentleman named Ken Zievenbergen, who spent most of his adult life running a successful business making high-end furniture for luxury homes. Then he was diagnosed with a brain tumor that brought that career to an end. After surgery and several months of recovery, his 2 daughters, both of whom were teachers, convinced their father to turn his business into a school and teach woodworking. Now, his shop is far beyond what you would find even in a well-heeled school district, filled with millions of dollars of equipment. He has about 3 dozen students, all of them on ESAs. I met him through a woman named Jenny Clark, who many of you may know. She's an Arizona school choice advocate and an ESA parent herself. She set up an innovation hub, as it's called, that helps education entrepreneurs like Ken get set up as education service providers, not teachers, service providers, tapping into the state's ESAs. Her kids have taken classes with Ken Zievenbergen. So if an ESA enables parents to customize their children's education, it also creates the opportunity to inject dynamism into a system in the form of these new education providers, many of whom might not have ever even considered a career in teaching or might not have had the time or the patience to pursue formal teacher certification through a traditional route. So the emerging age of school choice that we're here to discuss, it's not changing who gets to take advantage of a public education, but it's definitely changing who has permission to provide one. So now, at this point, because it seems to be my lot in life to be the skunk at every picnic that I attend, including my own, I want to inject a note of sobriety into the proceedings and sound a few cautionary notes. So this emerging era of choice and what I'm calling bespoke education will promote dynamism, create opportunities for students and teachers alike. But at the same time, the legacy public school system will educate a declining percentage of American children, but it's not going away. And I want to consider that for a moment, because there are some harsh realities I think we need to be honest about. There are no magic bullets in education, and that includes choice and competition. Look, for what it's worth, I'm actually not convinced, strike me dead, that competition is even the best argument for school choice. Of equal or greater importance, I think it allows for a full flowering of school models, schools that cultivate the arts or STEM, classical schools, or particular pedagogies like Montessori education, instead of this default thing that we think of as public school and that everything else must measure itself against to justify its existence. Now, arguably, the Achilles heel of ESA programs is the perception, and I think it's not entirely invalid, that it will mostly benefit the education equivalent of the worried well, if you like, those whose children are already in a private school for whom the ESA will represent functionally a voucher. relatively affluent families who have the motivation and parental bandwidth, as well as teacher entrepreneurs who are similarly motivated, energetic, and creative. But let's be clear, as a practical matter, the reality of holding down a job means that for most parents, even if they are less than delighted with their public school options, they still need a place for their kids to go, a thing called a school. So that brings up a dichotomy that I want to put in front of you that we need to be clear-eyed about, I think, in the teaching profession and when we open the field up to folks like the furniture maker that I described a moment ago. Let's be really honest. Almost anyone can successfully teach children who are motivated, curious, and engaged. But some students are none of those. Some students will need a school staffed by our most gifted and expert teachers. And to complicate things further, we're not training teachers adequately for success even with average students right now, let alone the hardest to motivate, reach, and teach. Candidly, I just don't think ESAs have the answer for this. We've been a little bit blithe about this, I will submit, either stating or implying that what's wrong with public education is a lack of competition, or that every problem can be solved by parents simply voting with their feet, giving them the power of the purse and letting the market work its magic. So for years, I have been the skunk in the picnic at ed reform convenings, saying to my ed reform friends, we have this idea that schools and teachers know what to do and all we need to do is hold them accountable. Where did you get that idea? Now I find myself saying more or less the same thing in convenings like this one among choice colleagues, that you have this idea that schools and teachers know what to do and that there's all this dynamism and expertise out there just waiting to be set free from union domination and the public school system. Where did you get that idea? So a low-performing school doesn't magically become good because it's a private or a charter school. It has to do something different and better in the classroom. New choices are not axiomatically good choices. But there's another limitation I want to discuss candidly. I simply don't see how choice alone improves teacher quality or teacher capacity. We've made a significant error, I'm going to submit to you, in the past several decades. I alluded to it a moment ago, assuming that schools and teachers know what to do and just need to be held accountable. Well, my earnest belief is had we spent the last 30 years focusing our energy on improving classroom practice, teaching, learning, curriculum, we'd be in better shape than had we spent the last 30 years, as we mostly did, working on things like teacher quality, standards, testing, and accountability. So this requires a shift in mindset, and it's how teachers are trained. And it requires a serious re-examination of capacity and, frankly, the job of the teacher himself or herself. There's an inconvenient fact that we need about 4 million men and women, full-time teachers, to teach in our schools. So by definition, just the law of averages suggests if you have a number that large, by definition, those folks are going to be men and women of ordinary abilities and capacities, not saints, not superstars, as I like to say. Remember that Donald Rumsfeld line about how you go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had? Well, the same thing is true of teachers and schools. You go to school with the teachers you have, not the teachers you wish you had. So if sustainable, achievable progress is our aim, and it must be our aim, then the job has to be one that is doable by those people, not the teachers we wish we had. If we just change where those teachers work and who employs them, I just don't see how that's going to change student outcomes. I've been spending a fair amount of time in the last couple of years in Houston, looking at Houston ISD's reform efforts. Now, candidly, the history of big city ed reform in the last 25 years doesn't have a lot to show for itself. You tend to see the same pattern. This big burst of energy when an energetic reformer comes in and breaks all the china, boost to test scores, and then those gains do what? They plateau and then they regress to the mean. It's only been 2 years. It's too soon to say if Houston's reforms under Superintendent Mike Miles will buck that pattern, but his playbook seems to at least tacitly been built so it can be implemented by the teachers Houston has, not by transforming the workforce. The city's so-called new education system, NES schools for short, It provides structure, tools, support. It builds routines in classrooms so that differentiated instruction can't be avoided. Takes lesson planning off the teacher's plate so they can focus on instruction. Now, critics, it will not surprise you to learn, say this is too top-down, it's too restrictive, but it aligns with proven practices, with direct instruction, with frequent checks for understanding, coherent curriculum, and clear learning goals. All those things that they never taught you in ed school. So the early returns are promising, but people hate it, and they hate Mike Miles for imposing it. They seem to have forgotten that Houston, which birthed the modern education reform movement, was taken over by the states because it was failing so badly. That, by the way, is another issue that we probably don't have time to address today, but it colors the discussions, the dwindling public appetite for all of this, for education reform. But the bottom line that I want to place before you is that we have to make sure that schools for non-choosers are good too. They will be foreseeably attended in our emerging choice age by our hardest to teach students. Their teachers need to be prepared accordingly. We also have to take seriously the risk that choice can exacerbate inequalities or inequities, particularly for disadvantaged students like the ones that I used to teach and Ian still teaches. It takes time, savvy, transportation sometimes to effectively choose and use these alternative schools. Middle class and more educated people can navigate choice-rich environments more successfully. They research schools, they fill out applications, arrange carpools, etc. So as choice expands, we need to guard against the risk of creating a two-tier system where affluent families congregate in high-quality schools, leaving the non-choosers, often the most disadvantaged, in legacy public schools that will become at risk of becoming the schools of last resort. Finally, and I'll conclude with this, there is a risk that a choose-your-own-adventure system of education could undermine social cohesion. This concerns me as well. At least in theory, and it is mostly in theory, let's be honest, public schools are supposed to be places where Americans of different backgrounds come together to live and learn alongside one each other. Clearly, that kind of gauzy Horace Mann ideal has never been realized in public schools. However, if everybody splinters off into their chosen niche, one school for secular progressives, another for religious conservatives, another for this ethnic group, another for that pedagogical philosophy, we risk losing any sense of a shared civic culture. Our society is already highly polarized. Balkanized education system could further this us versus them mentality. I've made no secret over the years of my admiration for E.D. Hirsch Jr., who I regard as kind of my mentor and guru. He's written powerfully about this for many, many years, about the civic dimension of education, noting that our founders saw schools as he put it, the central and main hope for the preservation of the democratic ideals and endurance of the nation as a republic. They banked on education to bind us together as Americans. So another challenge is in this choice-driven world, how do we ensure that students in, say, an Austin micro school, a Houston magnet, a Dallas Catholic school, share some common knowledge and civic preparation? Now, I realize, and I want to say this before I close, that I probably sound more like a school choice critic right now than a proponent. So let me be clear. These challenges, teacher capacity, equitable access, social cohesion, are not reasons to oppose school choice. I support choice because it empowers families and opens new opportunities for teachers and for these dynamic new models of education. But to sustain momentum and win not just temporary but enduring public support, we have to pair choice with quality. This means teacher training appropriate to diverse settings, providing, in my mind, structured curricula that teachers and parents can rely upon, and ensuring equitable access through targeted policies. So that means, I would argue, that schools of choice must take curriculum seriously as a best practice, not because they're forced to, but because it drives academic and civic outcomes. And it means redefining public education not as a system of schools, but a commitment to a well-educated citizenry, regardless of whether learning happens in a public, private, charter, or homeschool setting or other setting. So we stand at a crossroads, and I look forward to the discussion today. Choice offers teachers unprecedented opportunities to innovate and families new ways to meet their children's needs. But it demands we address these hard questions with urgency and with wisdom. If we do, we can build an education system that delivers both freedom and cohesion, equity and excellence, not just for some, but for all. I look forward to the discussion.
Excellent, excellent, Robert.
Thanks.
Great remarks. I'm happy that you started with your potential of launching a micro school.
You don't want to talk about my potential launch of Amazon.com?
Yeah, exactly. During the, in 2020 when COVID hit, my wife and we joined forces with 5 other families.
There you
go. And we hired a teacher and we created our own pandemic pod. And it was amazing. My son loved it. This was for 3rd grade. There was 6 boys. Wonderful year. We followed the school curriculum, so we stayed on track.
Wait, your school had a curriculum?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
We were actually able to purloin it from the school system. But at the end of the year, even though as great as it was, we felt this tug to go back to the traditional system. Now, we didn't have a voucher, and maybe that had made a difference. But I'm curious.
So hold on, who was the teacher? You?
Oh no, we hired a teacher.
So if you could have, as a hypothetical, if the ESA dollars were available to you to use public dollars to maintain that teacher's salary, would you have stuck with it?
That's what I'm saying. We didn't have a voucher. It may have changed our calculus because the other families were certainly interested as well. And that's why I want to talk to you, which is who, if in that scenario, if we see that growing, where there are more and more parents who are saying, you know what, this could be really great for my child. If it's not schools of education, who's providing the guidance either to teachers or to parents to figure out how to capitalize on this newfound opportunity?
Who's providing the guidance?
Yeah, for both the teacher as well as parents.
Well, who provided the guidance for you?
Well, I guess that's, I mean,
were you the only professional educator among those 6 families?
I was, but it was also, 12 parents who were determined to provide a great education for their kids. And maybe that's enough. I don't know. But there has to be a role for, whether it's schools of education or others, to play a role. If we're saying that things are shifting to this bespoke, what's the role? Because to your point, there's got to be some cohesion, some strategy.
Well, I'm trying to talk that into existence, the cohesion. I can't finish a paragraph without invoking E.D. Hirsch. I've never been able to do that.
Yes.
So that's my plea, is let's not lose sight of the need for schools that serve not just our child's interests, but communities and the nation's interests. But I think implied in your question is a bit of a tripwire. How old were the kids in your
It was 3rd grade. So
okay,
this was all 8-year-olds.
I was saying before, let's be really honest that for some kids it is just not that hard to teach, right? In other words, they're motivated. They've got parents who are engaged. Also during the pandemic, I think sales of that classic Zig Engelman book, Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. I think for a while it was by far the #1 selling book on Amazon.com, which I did not found. I'll get over it. Because it's not that hard, right? If you've got parents, you can teach your child how to read. Again, Hirsch and core knowledge, which is my favorite flavor. A lot of homeschooling parents, maybe you did this as well. No, you had a curriculum, but a lot of homeschooling parents, the first thing they do is the last thing that we do in the public school system. They seek out those core knowledge books. What does your 1st grader need to know? What does your 2nd grader need to know? They figure, I need a curriculum. So that's where they start. So I don't want to say it's not that hard, but it's a less challenging lift to teach little kids the basics of math and reading with off-the-shelf curriculum than it is when you get further along the line. And this is sorry, I'm completely not answering your question, Ian. but I'm really focused on this dichotomy, as I described, between what we can do with teachers who are untrained and novices versus the tasks that we need to really advance the fortunes of kids who have real struggles.
Yep.
A couple of weeks ago, I wrote a piece after looking at the work of Rebecca Cochler and her colleagues at Magpie on multisyllabic decoding. For years we've had this issue where we get the lift in fourth grade scores and then it plateaus and it doesn't seem to stick in eighth grade. What's going on? And I felt called out by this because for years I've pointed out that the kids that I referred to at my school in the South Bronx, they could all read, they could all decode. They were struggling with background knowledge,
Correct.
with vocabulary. Well, there's another element in there as well, that some kids continue to need advanced decoding instruction well into middle school. This doesn't come up in ed school as well. Teachers are not trained to do this. This is really a challenging thing for teachers to do in a class with 25 kids with different needs all over the place. So I'm repeating myself here, I suppose. But I just want us to be clear-eyed that we can make a lot of gains in certain settings among certain populations, but there's also going to be a continued profound need to apply our best talent, our most rigorous work to the kids that you and I have spent our careers working with.
So is one way to address the lack of cohesion and to force schools of education to be more directed in what they're preparing teachers to do, is that the assessments that are given by states, you and I have talked about this a lot, that the annual exams are these content-free.
Sure.
Is it that we should be building more knowledge requirements into state assessments, and then that will almost force the invisible hand for how, whether you're the School of Education or homeschooling, that you all know that we've got to hit this goal in terms of what the body of knowledge is we want our kids to have?
Okay, I guess I'll speak heresy. I don't mind standardized testing. Mm-hmm. What I don't like is how it's used and misused.
Yep.
This is what you and I have discussed over the years. And what you're alluding to is I've said for quite a while now, and I didn't get this idea originally, I think Hirsch came up with this as well, that a reading test is essentially a test of background knowledge. That we treat it like reading comprehension is a transferable skill, that you can learn how to do things like find the main idea, can compare and contrast, make inferences off of just any old text, but that's not true, as you and I know. You have to know a little bit about the subject, and sometimes a lot about the subject. Like I can make inferences about baseball, all day, put a piece in front of me about architecture, and I don't know it that well. But this is interesting, Ian, because there's a lot of folks in the emerging choice world who are just dyed-in-the-wool anti-testing. They view it as whether it's the camel's nose under the tent of governments insisting what they teach and whatnot. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know the answer to that, because I always worry, by dint of the fact that I spent most of my teaching career in the South Bronx and Harlem, what the policies that what I call the worried well are concerned about, they undergird just the minimal expectations for kids who don't have those two active and engaged parents for whom this discussion might be irrelevant.
It's one of always my concern, which is that if we create this incredible environment of choice, but there isn't any anchor to some body of knowledge, which is what propels the culture forward, then are we doing the right thing? So if you had the dean of Columbia Teachers College here, or Harvard Graduate School of Education, because we're piling...
Well, I can't, because she's got an order of protection.
Oh yes, that's right. Because we're piling on them. But what would be your advice for them to deal with this new environment?
It's a great question, because one of the questions that I think we're going to face in the next couple of years is the degree to which, on the one hand, I painted it, I kind of made fun of formal teacher training, but it's not a joke. We do a terrible job of preparing teachers for the reality of classrooms. I and others have pointed out that it's not, they don't view it as their job. And the only thing that teaching credentials have been shown to raise is not test scores, but teacher salaries. Right. So if that's the case,
and that's not even based on performance.
That's
It's
right.
just based on
Just
the credential.
based on fog in a mirror and how long you come to your school. So it shouldn't surprise us that there's this appetite to kind of just blow it all up and let somebody who has a skill that kids want, that parents want, just teach. Look, you don't have to be credentialed to teach in the private school system right now, and
Right.
parents pay, what, $60,000 a year or upwards of that in New York to send their kids to these schools with uncredentialed teachers. So let's be really clear-eyed about what value that adds. But okay, so what would my answer be to those who are wedded to the traditional teacher pipeline, Teachers College and elsewhere? I reserve the right to change my answer, but for now I think it's, well, you probably need to focus on the legacy public school system and ensuring that those teachers are prepared for, frankly, the toughest job in American education. And it will not do to have them spend their time debating pedagogy of the oppressed.
Yes.
The best professional development I've been to in the last 20 years happened long after I left the classroom. There's a series of conferences, they were launched in England, called Research Ed.
Oh, yeah.
And have you spoken to one?
Yes, I have.
Then you know what I'm talking about.
I taught about the success sequence, in fact.
Okay. You know, they're talking about cognitive load theory. They're talking about cognitive science, how kids learn. They're talking about direct and explicit instruction. All the stuff that either teachers' colleges don't cover or frankly turn their noses up at. But there are teachers, and it's amazing when you go to one of these conferences. There was one a month ago in New York City. It's teachers, it's administrators, it's school board members. It's word of mouth. It's like a grassroots thing, and it's all the stuff you should have learned in ed school. So what else would I say to the Dean of Teachers College? Get thee to a Research Ed conference, because the folks that you trained felt sufficiently failed by it that they're seeking this out. What does that tell you?
Yeah, I think I would tell them, get your act together, because is it a good thing, for example, Tennessee has now launched its own statewide initiative, Grow Your Own, because what's clearly happening is that the market is responding.
Well, let's hope, that the market is responding. It's been for the drum that I bang on about that we need to change practice, not just policy. Tennessee under Penny Schwinn and Louisiana under Cade Brumley. There's been a lot. There's been Mississippi under Carrie Wright and others. Have gotten serious about transforming classroom practice. So there are green shoots out there. We have this science of reading movement. Thank you, Emily Hanford, wherever you are, for popularizing that. So people are getting serious about changing classroom practice, and frankly, policy is kind of lagging in that regard. But that should be, to your very good point, an obvious cue to those who are in the business of preparing teachers that, wait a minute, you've been missing the boat here. And if you want to prepare teachers for success in the actual classrooms that they will inhabit with the actual students in front of them, you've got to change what you do, and you've got to prepare them for what they will encounter.
I wonder if the accreditation process is an opportunity here, especially for schools of education. So the President Trump issued an executive order last week or the week before, really changing the rules of the game, most notably with trying to exclude practices like pedagogy of the oppressed being the central element of teacher education. How do you think that plays a role in, again, trying to create some apparatus that through the invisible hand forces schools of education to operate differently?
I'm not familiar enough with the language of the executive order. Accreditation doesn't necessarily feel to me like I'm not saying it's an inappropriate lever, but it doesn't feel to me like the most powerful lever. Because if the schools of education really are more about theory and philosophy and history of education and not about actual practice, then they will lose share. Right? And I just confess that I'm not one of these people who thinks that competition solves everything. But in this instance, it should be a wake-up call. If you start losing parents to ESAs, if you start losing teachers to the research eds of the world, if you create a system where you're opening up the field and people who are routing around the traditional teacher certification route and being successful in their careers, then that should be a wake-up call to you. Now, granted, we're not seeing that yet, but if you were to ask me to predict what's this going to look like in 10 years, if they don't change their act, then I think you will start to see there will be lots of ways and lots of opportunities to have a career in education without spending a minute in one of these institutions.
Yep. We're getting close to taking questions, so please prepare. If you have a question online, you can email joe.pitts, P-I-T-T-S, @aei.org. One thing you mentioned in your remarks, I've heard you say this before, you have to go to battle with the team, with the army you have. And you've made this statement, we need to hire 4 million teachers, or not to hire, we need 4 million teachers in the workforce. And I always feel a little cringe of, oh, if I'm a teacher, how does that make me feel? Because
I'm not a teacher basher. I was a teacher.
No, I know.
What I advocate is for what I wish I had when I was a teacher.
But would you? There are 1.1 million doctors in the United States. There are 1.3 million lawyers in the United States.
So more teachers and doctors and lawyers combined.
Right. No. So the sheer number is the point. But
hold on a second. But that don't gloss over that, because for years, what have we tried to do in ed reform? Oh, we're going to raise raise teacher pay. We're going to use merit pay, and we're going to lure people away from these other professions. Are you high?
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's the toughest job in the world, and you think by raising the salary, a couple of $1,000s, you're going to say, well, I was going to be an engineer.
Or create these bonus structures that really don't.
So I mean, at its high watermark, how many recruits did Teach for America have a year? 5,000.
But what's the implication?
You're not going to transform the teacher workforce.
Right. Okay. So you wouldn't say the same thing about the medical profession, I presume.
Well, the medical profession has other inducements, and it's easier. Okay, it's probably easier to be a doctor than to be a fifth grade teacher if you're good at it.
Right. So what? Right. So what would you say? What's the concession? I guess.
The concession is we have to make the job of teacher doable by the teachers we have. I mean, think of what we do now to teachers. We're asking them to differentiate instruction for 25 kids or more who may be at 25 different skill levels.
Absolutely.
Behavior problems, no curriculum. Why did I become a curriculum advocate? Because I was told it was a best practice to create lessons to tailor to the individual needs of my mentor from Teachers College told me, Mr. Pondicio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. I am not, I assure you. I needed a damn curriculum. And then on top of that, they have to manage behavior problems. They have to be, in settings like where we've worked, quasi-social workers. Yep. And now, thanks SEL, unpaid, unlicensed psychotherapists. And I want to be clear here, yes, it's, the problems are real. The mental health crisis is real. We're not making that up. But how did it become the job of the classroom teacher to deal effectively with every problem in American life and still teach kids how to read and do math? That is not workable. Why are we asking the most stressed out and frankly dysfunctional institution in American life, the urban public school, for example, to be the social services agency of first and last resort? That can't possibly be the answer. It doesn't mean the needs are not real. Yep. It just means it can't possibly reside here, and we still expect teachers to knock it out of the park on reading and math. We have literally made this job too hard for the teachers we have.
Got it. And then I'll come to questions. You had a column recently about some of the president's goals around manufacturing, trying to bring manufacturing back into the country, but you made a very good point, which is, do we have the pipelines of talent that we're preparing kids to, and then I want to now raise it to the level of teachers. Do we have the educators who have the ability to teach these kinds of more industry-focused skills, and if not, where do we get those folks?
Yeah, I think I think CTE, which I will confess is not an area that I've looked at closely at all, but it seems to be a relative bright spot, both in terms of graduation rates and workforce preparation. In other words, kids who are so-called CTE concentrators, they've taken multiple CTE classes, just graduate at a higher rate and enter the workforce at above average rates. And a lot of the teachers who teach CTE are themselves, industry professionals. So there's that. The tension in that piece, thank you for citing it, is not is not necessarily the teacher, but just the change in the workplace. In other words, and this is not a political comment, if you have this idea that this administration has that we're going to restore the American manufacturing base and restore good high-paying blue-collar jobs, great. I'm all for that as a goal. But if you've got 1/3 of kids who cannot master middle school math, they are simply not prepared for success in the contemporary manufacturing environment, which is not assembly line, it's junior engineering. You're not going to put somebody who is minimally qualified to work on a multi-million-dollar piece of machinery. So the tension there is not, can we train kids for success in manufacturing, but are we clear-eyed about the demands of modern manufacturing, which are not that different than the needs for college?
Yep. All right. Let me turn to questions. We have two here in the front.
I would love to know your perspective on the role of assessments in preparing teachers. Assessments can play a role. They can't do everything, but used as a piece of evidence, they can help paint a piece of the portfolio in how teachers are doing, how students are doing. What would be your advice to the testing industry to create better assessments that provide better information to the users of that information?
Faster, quicker assessments.
And are you speaking specifically about student assessments or assessments of teachers?
Oh, teacher certification.
Both. I'm interested in the answers to both, but you can choose one or the other or both.
Yeah, as I said a moment ago, teacher certification has never been proven to raise anything but salaries. I remember I was an alt-cert teacher back in the day, so I had 6 weeks of teacher training before my classroom experience started. And in New York, you had like 5 opportunities to take the teacher certification exam. So I made a conscious decision that summer, I wasn't going to prepare for them whatsoever. I had 6 weeks to do my student teaching, prepare my lessons, et cetera. I was going to focus on that. I took the teacher certification exams anyway, and I damn near got a perfect score. And not because I'm a genius, let's be clear. It was baby simple stuff, and frankly embarrassing. So if that's the level of preparation that's required to do well on a teacher certification, and I think New York, frankly, has lowered the standards since then, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was something, was it Praxis? There was a teacher assessment in New York.
They stopped giving the literacy exam.
So evidently, the results of that was that there was dissatisfaction with the demographic makeup of the people who were not passing the exam. And rather than answer the question of, well, why is it that there's certain groups of folks not, let's just eliminate the exam or reduce its importance or reduce the rigor of it.
Yeah.
I think there's some value, particularly around subject matter knowledge. Remember the 3 things I said, the ability to teach, subject matter knowledge, and willingness to take feedback. I don't think we have enough mechanisms where we're really ensuring teachers actually demonstrate they know what they're supposed to be teaching about.
No, look, this is anecdote, not data, but I wrote a book a few years ago about Success Academy in New York City, where I spent a year embedded in one of Eva Moskowitz's schools. And it was kind of fascinating. I love this anecdote. So remember, we were talking about TFA back in the day when we were all about teacher quality.
Right.
It became a thing in charter schools that they would name the classrooms not room 222, but where the kids had, the teachers had gone to college. So you'd walk down the halls of a KIP or an Achievement First, and it's Harvard, Yale, Penn, Michigan, Stanford. Well, you walk down the halls of the Success Academy and you see Hunter College, SUNY Oneonta. There was a kindergarten class in this one school, BMCC, Borough of Manhattan Community College. Okay, so clearly she has figured out, Eva Moskowitz, how to get these incredible results with the same students, teacher candidates who come out of the schools that we all worked in. How is she doing it? Well, she likes to get teachers, frankly, before they have been spoiled by other environments where she can kind of shape them to her program. So that's kind of interesting, right? In other words, it says something about the way, again, that we teach and train teachers, or acculturate and train teachers. And that should be, back to the previous question, that should be a wake-up call for these institutions as well. We didn't answer your question about
student assessments.
Student assessments. Well, I'll use another example from Success Academy, since I just brought it up. You could argue they did it too much, but they were constantly assessing kids. So by the time the state exam came around, they knew exactly what they were going to get, and they were right. There was no mystery whatsoever. And they were looking at interim assessments, constantly, maybe too much. But I think that's, it depends on what the purpose is for. I'm not a big fan of standardized tests, kind of over controlling the learning environment. Like, this is where you get curriculum narrowing. This is where kids' education turns into reading, math, and nothing else. I don't like that very much. But the last thing we should be sentimental for a day before that, when it was all, oh, I know the kids are doing fine, I just know.
Yeah, no, as it relates to student assessments, as I said before, I'm a big fan of more explicit knowledge-based exams in science and social studies. I think it was 2010 in New York State when the state decided to eliminate, I think it was the 4th and 8th grade social studies exam, right? And you could just see over the course of the next decade in elementary school, the time that had been allotted for science and social studies, right, went from daily classes, 45 minutes a day, to maybe 1 or 2 classes, because that time was now filled with content-free ELA type classes where, what's the main idea? Content-free instruction. And I think that's a direct result of making the state assessments this devoid of actual content.
I have a baby simple view of this, which is, I'll take off my teaching hat and put on my policy hat now. Any assessment regime should encourage the classroom conditions that you want to see. So if you think about what standardized tests do right now, well, turning teaching into find the main idea, et cetera, makes sense because that's the putative demands of the test. Well, if you want kids to have a knowledge-rich experience, if you want them to get all the science, all the social studies, art, music, et cetera, the very first piece I wrote when I left the classroom was a semi-serious piece about random testing. I'm a baseball fan, and like, how did they get rid of drug and steroid problems in baseball? Random testing. So I remember writing, what would it be like if the state showed up at your school and said, "Hi, I'm here from the state ed department. Give me these 15 kids from 3rd grade in the library in 20 minutes. We're testing 3rd grade science today. Thanks very much. Come back 6 months later. Hi, we're back. Today we're doing 5th grade math." In other words, you wouldn't know who the students are, you wouldn't know what the subject was. The only way you could be successful under that kind of testing regime would be test or teach every kid, every subject, every day.
And that's E.D. Hirsch, that's the cultural body of knowledge.
Yeah, but the theory, the point there is you have to have an assessment system that rewards the input that you seek, which we do not have, to your very good point.
Correct.
If we are to accept as fact that an increasing, hello Robert, an increasing number of American students are going to be educated in private schools, and if we are going to present to the American public that school choice is in fact an actual choice, that if you send your kids to a charter school, a micro school, a home school, a private school, you have far more agency on about how your child is educated. This goes back to the issue of accreditation. Right now, what's happening in private schools is woefully missing from this conversation. The National Association of Independent Schools, in private schools, as you mentioned, teachers are not certified. However, the vast majority of the professional development that is required of them by the school has nothing to do with academic outcomes. Yep. It has everything to do with all the indoctrination and the decline of academic quality in the classroom in private schools over the last, I would say, 2 decades, starting about 2015 in earnest, and then accelerating post-2020. I saw yesterday on Instagram that the valedictorian at Princeton, who's this lovely young boy, is a chemistry major, and he's going to teach chemistry at Ransom Everglades. Now, my children both went to private schools, the best ones in New York, and I did pay obscene amounts of money for it. They both had decent educations because they left before the bridge collapsed before them. But their teachers were wearing a jacket similar to yours, worn elbows, and they had taught classics or math or physics or whatever for decades. Many of them had come from small colleges and had decades of experience. That is what I was paying for. Now, a 22-year-old out of college, albeit Princeton, albeit a valedictorian, he has zero experience of being in a classroom. Now, the other thing is that private schools, the National Association of Independent Schools, and other accreditors like Cognia, which is accrediting a vast majority of networks of schools that are now going online, so to speak, they are reimagining education. There is a marked and noticeable emphasis or de-emphasis on the need for a quality teacher inside the classroom. Now, my kids had 4 or 5 kids in their classrooms, but the teacher teaching classics at a very prestigious Manhattan private school, teaching 4th year Latin, was a 26-year-old in transition, teaching 4 kids.
Okay,
so
but here's what I never
the reimagining
hear.
of AI, the role of technology in the classroom is completely being overlooked, and no parent cares about it, and no parent is paying attention to it.
Have I mentioned that I'm a choice advocate? Because I'm a choice advocate. And by the way, I'm a choice advocate because here's what I'm going to say. Someone needs to explain to me and to my fellow choice advocates why the parents in the schools that you're describing are not voting with their feet. My daughter went to elite private schools in New York City as well, and it is lost upon me. I mean, just think of choice theory. Parents will make the best decision for their children. We're talking about parents who have the most resources, literally
most access to information.
They can pick up and move to the suburbs. They can, and they sit there in these woke citadels, and they just sit and seethe and complain, and they. Oh.
Because the whole point of accreditation and the reason why
Hold on, are you saying that those parents are staying there because, well, they're accredited?
No.
My kid is being indoctrinated, but the school's accredited.
Not at all. I'm saying that every private school is, I struggle to find private schools that are not accredited. I mean, faith-based schools, suburban, urban, rural. However, the point is that I can show you a student who goes to Brearley and what they're learning and their teacher training, and I can show you a faith-based, teeny tiny little itty-bitty school in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, that is private, where the teacher is teaching the exact same thing. Because why? They are all trained by the same accreditor. And if they're not trained by the same accreditor, the National Association of Independent Schools, there are 2,000 private schools, and because of school choice, more schools are going to be accredited by them, and now they're part of a network of a larger umbrella accreditor, which has the same training programs.
Yep.
If you go on the website of any accreditor, a Catholic school, I forget what the acronym is, NCEA, and look at their conference presentations, there are many speakers that overlap with the National Association of Independent Schools.
But
Same with the
you're kind of
Episcopal
aligning
schools.
my point, though, which is I still don't understand.
Where do they go? Where do we go? Where do we go?
You're saying that
Where?
every single school in America is exactly the same?
Every single school in America that is accredited is training their teachers the same way.
We may have to agree to disagree, but
I would
it
love to
strains
know
my
what
credulity that the most affluent and influential and
Absolutely.
loudest parents in this
100%
country have
agree with
no
you.
say over
They
what happens in their
absolutely do
schools.
not. The enrollment contract of
okay.
Cognia is the same as the National Association of
Got it.
Independent Schools. You can
Okay,
expel.
it sounds.
The other point about professional development, by the way, I never had a single professional development in my full-time days in the classroom that was about curriculum.
Yeah, well, that's
It was about all this other stuff, but it was.
Yes.
I don't know what it's like in the private school system, but professional development is another big weak point in
Of course.
in the talent pipeline.
on the job PD, absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you for that lively question. We are actually at the end of time.
Oh, come on, let's keep going.
We could keep going, but I don't want to impede on our next panel. So please a round of applause for Robert Pandiscio. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you again for joining us this morning for what was a really lively couple of talks we just heard. My name is Erin Davis Valdez. I lead the Center for Education and Public Service incubator at the new University of Austin. So we're a new center within a new university, and so this question of how we prepare teachers for an emerging new era of choice is on our minds, and it's part of our mission. So I'm here today to actually learn from all of you. Selfishly, that's why I'm here. And so I'm delighted to sort of introduce our panel to help us sort of start to answer the question, what kind of ecosystem is needed to support teachers and leaders in this new world of school choice? And I want to make sure we broaden the conversation beyond just teaching to acknowledge, and I think it's come up a couple of times already, that we might need new kinds of testing, we might need new kinds of accreditors, we might need all kinds of new things in this space to support these emerging models. So I'm honored to have with me today a really luminary panel. So I'll start here with Dr. Patrick Wolf. He's the Distinguished Professor and 21st Century Chair in School Choice at the University of Arkansas. Listing his accomplishments and accolades would take up the remainder of this panel. So I'll sum it up by saying that his research and leadership are in no small part responsible for the growth of school choice that we've seen over the past decade. Next, we have Dr. James Schulz. He's the head of K-12 education reform at the Institute for Governance and Civics at Florida State University. As an expert on education policy, he focuses primarily on school choice, education finance, teacher labor markets, and character education. I'll also note that he earned his doctorate in education policy from the University of Arkansas, where he was a research fellow in the Department of Education Reform. And finally, over here, last but not least, Dr. Daniel Copeland. He is the Dean of the Masters in Classical Education at Hillsdale College, which is my alma mater. Dr. Copeland has won numerous teaching awards, including Professor of the Year, for which I promise you the competition is very stiff. He's been a mentor to many of the teachers and leaders in the growing classical education revival, and I'm privileged to have learned many things from him myself. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our panelists to kind of give us a brief sort of statement of their view on this. And I'll start with you, Dr. Wolf. I'd like you to comment on some of the new pathways that you're seeing in the teacher preparation space, perhaps in response to the growth of school choice or other pressures, and then kind of give us your assessment of where those stand at the moment.
Well, thank you, Erin, for that very generous introduction. And I was the professor who got James Schulz through his doctoral program. And it wasn't easy. So school choice has exploded across the country. We've all seen this. And it does open up this idea about greater pluralism in education. And the point was made at the end of the last session about really how pluralistic are teachers allowed to be in their training and such. But we do have some experience with alternative certification, alternative training programs to train teachers to teach in sort of unconventional schools. Robert Pandiscio mentioned that Eva Moskowitz draws from a particular pipeline for her success, or for her schools. I did a study of the Milwaukee school ecology, you might say, which has been dynamically engaged with school choice for 30 years now. And we titled our report on that, Finding the Right Fit, because what we found is the distinctive schools in Milwaukee, the Lutheran schools, the Catholic schools, the Waldorf schools, they had partnerships with particular colleges and universities to train their teachers. So there was sort of this partnership, this direct pipeline, so that they could access distinctive teachers. And I imagine Daniel's going to speak about that, about Hillsdale's training of students for the Barney charter school network, which has nothing to do with purple dinosaurs. I just want everyone to know that We have experience with this now. There are issues with some of the training programs. Teach for America and its variants did invest very heavily in wokeism for a while, and I hope they are rethinking some of that. And the various religious offshoots of Teach for America as well, the Alliance for Catholic Education, the Lynch School at Boston College also has a specialized training program for Catholic teachers. So we have some models out there. I think some of them are working to bring greater distinctiveness, pluralism, and a good cultural fit to the schools that are emerging, the schools of choice that are emerging, but we certainly still have a ways to go.
Thank you. Dr. Schulz, I'd like you to address sort of, from a teacher labor market perspective, kind of where we're seeing teachers coming from now, and maybe how that's changed over the decades, maybe some of the weaknesses the current system is exposing. If you just reflect on that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, in the earlier session, Robert talked about some of the problems of colleges of education. I want to come a little bit to the defense of colleges of education and harken back to something Ian said, where he mentioned we have to work with or go to war with the generals we have. My college track coach said it a little bit differently. He said, you got to dance with the girls you came with. And we can't place all of the blame, or guys, whoever brought, you got to dance with the ones who brung you, is the way my friend Mike McShane says it. So the colleges of education operate in an environment. They are highly regulated by state departments of education. All of my degrees have been from colleges of education, even your college of education, which was slightly different. A bachelor's, a master's in elementary education. I've taught in public colleges of education, and they are highly regulated by state departments of education. They tell them exactly what has to be taught in all of their different classes, sometimes specifically listing the classes that they have to teach, sometimes it's the content that they have to teach. If you put two programs up side by side within a state, you'll see two programs from different universities that are almost identical. They might have slightly different names on the courses, but the content in them is almost the same, partly because of the regulatory environment we have. And that environment makes it particularly tough for private universities, especially religious universities, who want to do something different because they're so highly regulated that if the university wants to do something different, like have a religious core, it oftentimes has to be on top of the regular core that they have to have for teachers. And so it's very common to see colleges of education requiring 130 or 140 credit hours to become a teacher, whereas most other majors are in the 120s, right? So we make it even more difficult to become a teacher, and we highly regulate these programs. So part of the problem is that where we situate the governance or the rulemaking authority is at the state level. The state gets to determine who's qualified to teach, who can be certified. They set the test scores that need to be passed. They set the curriculum that should be covered in the schools of education. We talked about accreditation some. They're the ones that really the colleges of education have to report to if they want to prepare teachers who are allowed to be certified. And so what you have is this great homogenization of the teacher labor force. And we had, in the 80s, 90s, this push for alternative certifications. You heard Robert talk about TFA, and there are plenty others out there that tried to bring people in through a different pathway, where you didn't have to go in through the traditional college of education, get the education degree, and become a teacher. But in many cases, all these programs did is change when you started teaching and when you received the curriculum. It was usually the same curriculum repackaged into a graduate program, but in the traditional program, you got the curriculum and then you taught, and in the alternative program, you taught and then you got the curriculum. They didn't really change much about how we actually prepare teachers or what we're teaching them. And many of these programs are just situated in colleges of education. My old university, the University of Missouri St. Louis, had a great growing, I say great, in that it was well received, I should say, a program for alternatively certified folks that was essentially, like I said, a repackaging of the program where they're getting the same content. Grow your own teacher programs were mentioned earlier. The grow your own programs, I would say, are more of a recruitment tool in most cases than they are a preparation change, right? So it's not that we're changing how we prepare teachers in most of those places. All we're doing is saying, if you are from this school and you promise to come back and teach for us, do all the same regular training, but we'll pay for it. And so it's a recruitment tool, not a change in how we're teaching. So the teacher labor force is dominated by state departments of education, which is what makes me excited about what's going on in Florida with classical schools. So Florida has created the opportunity for teachers in classical schools, especially classical charter schools, to be certified essentially by the local school, right? So the local school can hire someone and say, we think this person's qualified to teach, and they can become certified by the state, essentially by the school district's nod, right? The school or the schools saying, we believe in this person, and they get a 5-year credential to be a teacher in a classical school. Now that doesn't prepare them or certify them to teach in a traditional school or other places, but it changes that locus of control from the state to the individual school. And that's part of what we need to see in terms of regulatory change, is changing the certification environment, changing the regulatory environment, so that as these schools pop up and they have different types of schools, classical, Montessori, Waldorf, whatever, they can tap into different types of institutions that are preparing teachers differently for those schools.
Thank you. Dr. Clubman, you're doing something that very much looks like what Dr. Wolf mentioned here, which is providing a preparation that has specific pipelines. In other words, you probably have a lot of partner schools that you work with. And I'd love to hear what you're learning about what you're doing at Hillsdale to support and prepare leaders and teachers for classical education, and any key learnings you've had from that.
Yeah, well, it's amazing to hear James talk, because he adequately described the environment that we found ourselves in about a decade and a half ago, where we were once again, Hillsdale College, we had a state-approved teacher certification program, and we were once again asked to re-up in terms of our accreditation through the state. And we were graduating around 10 teachers a year, but yet we were meeting the same requirements that in Eastern Michigan, right up the road was, and even though we're radically different programs. At the same time, another interesting thing happened. We discovered that private and charter schools were coming to Hillsdale and hiring teachers, and we never saw them in the ed department. They would go directly to the English department, the history department, the math department, and they would skip the ed program. So we had to take a look in the mirror, and we had to say, why are we jumping through all these hoops when the majority of our graduates are going to teach in schools that don't require teacher certification? So we had this moment where we looked at ourselves in the mirror and said, well, what happens if we didn't concentrate on state certification? What happens if we designed a teacher preparation program, crazy enough, that was consistent with the mission of the college? And also, we reached out to the schools that were already hiring our graduates and asked them, what are you looking for in teachers? And what we discovered was very similar to what Ian described earlier. They wanted people who knew content knowledge. They wanted people who had some pedagogical experience, but they also wanted good people. People who were mature enough to receive the kind of feedback that Ian described. And so we completely pushed that teacher certification program, that state-approved program aside, and we began to develop a program at Hillsdale, particular courses that were what those schools asked for. They wanted from our students, they wanted strong background knowledge, they wanted some exposure to the classroom. And so as an education department, we decided to partner with local schools to get our undergraduates into classrooms. We also had a little bit of an identity crisis in that we discovered that what schools were really interested in was the core curriculum of the college, the courses that our teachers were taking in history, mathematics, but they were also interested in deep subject matter as well. So what we decided, we came to the conclusion that what we were going to do would be support those people who were interested in teaching. And that meant that the education program was not the primary courses that these teachers would take, but we would offer our courses a la carte, no prerequisites. So if you were interested in elementary education, we would offer you a course in early literacy. If you wanted to teach in the upper elementary grades, we would offer you a course in children's literature. We would offer you a course in kind of basic pedagogy, getting you ready for the school. When we made that switch on the side, the state of Michigan told us, if you don't have certification, your program is going to die on the vine. Well, I can tell you about a decade and a half later, we are thriving. We've gone from a faculty of 3 to a faculty of 9. We have now opened up 2 graduate programs in classical education. And so we're thriving. Now, I know that this is not going to solve the problem that Robert identified in terms of offering millions of teachers that are required in order to staff schools. But Hillsdale College offers kind of a laboratory of looking at teacher development in a whole new way. One more thing, we began intentionally to focus on who the teacher was, not necessarily what they can do. What they can do is important, but we wanted them to be good human beings. And that comes from a broad, liberal arts, quality, content-rich curriculum at Hillsdale College.
Thank you. I want to turn it back over to you, Dr. Wolf. I'd like for you to reflect on, in this emerging age of school choice we're all talking about, are there still sort of core specific skills or knowledge or virtues that you think teachers need, or is it a la carte from here on out? Or reflect on that, because Ian had one answer to this question in terms of what he's looking for. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would generally echo what Dan just said about content knowledge and skills in classroom management. When Teach for America and other alt-cert programs, and actually just about any teacher preparation program, when they survey the people who drop out of the profession early, the most common reason given is that they weren't sufficiently trained in classroom management. So they were put in a situation that they could not manage. And of course, in the age of wokeism, they weren't always given the tools that they might apply to manage the classroom. So strong content knowledge, especially if you're teaching the high school level, and classroom management skills, and just some level of caring, right? I mean, you've got to care about kids because you're going to be around them all the time, and they're going to challenge you like crazy. So some level of caring too. I'll tell a brief anecdote. So one of my sons is a professional stage actor, which is a synonym for unemployed. So he calls me, a couple months ago he calls me, he says, Dad, the local school district here in Pennsylvania has offered me a teaching position as a long-term sub at the high school. And I said, wow, that's great, Brendan. And he said, but I don't know, I'm not certified. I've never taken an ed class in my life. And I'm like, Brendan, you are a professional actor. You can engage a classroom. You graduated Phi Beta Kappa with a double major. You know your stuff. You're good at math. You're good at social studies. I just said, read up on classroom management. Focus on classroom management. That will be the challenge for you. The rest of the stuff will come easily. And he's doing great. He's loving it. He especially likes dealing with the special education breakout, connecting with the kids with learning disabilities. So, it's an N of one, right? It's an anecdote. And he's a special kid. Obviously, he's my son, so I think he's a special kid. But I think it does underscore the idea that that's the skill set that succeeds in the classroom.
Can I jump in? I mean, something you said, and it reminded me of, also something that was mentioned earlier. And it's a piece of wisdom that comes from that great Disney movie, Ratatouille. Right? They say, anyone can cook, right? And the idea wasn't that everyone can cook, but that a cook could come from anywhere, right? And the same is with a teacher. An actor could become a great teacher. A woodworker could become a great teacher. And part of what we're seeing with this sort of liberation of the teacher labor force is that anyone can become a teacher without having to go through the same general pipeline that they used to have to go through before. And I think that's exciting. And we have to continue to grow those opportunities to make it possible for people to make that move. And it's again, the systems and the structures that have prohibited it in the past, whether that's a state level or the local level, that we have to work on changing.
I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Copeland. Could you reflect a little bit on the graduates of the program that you have, or the ones you've seen over the decades? What were some trends that you saw with them, and maybe how that differed from how you used to do it? You spoke about that, so maybe if there are differences or just generalities you can draw from that, might shed some light here.
Yeah, well, we've already heard this morning how ineffective traditional teacher preparation programs can often be. And so as a result, we're making these future teachers jump through hoops, and yet it has very little impact, quality impact on the classroom. I think what we've discovered at Hillsdale is that rather than having this kind of top-down approach, you talked about this, the states kind of mandating through the teacher education program, we've developed a conversation with the schools that hire our graduates. And we keep that conversation open. They come to campus to hire our graduates, and we want to know, what are they interested in? That did not happen prior when we were in the state-mandated, state-approved teacher preparation program, because there was no opportunity to do that. It was all one direction, the state down. And so I like the idea of empowering local school leaders, allowing them to make decisions in terms of hiring. Yes, there will be abuses in that, but empowering local school leaders to decide who they want in the classroom, whether it's a theater major, a chemistry major. And then it also places some responsibility on those school leaders as well in order to develop high quality onboarding processes of bringing those teachers into the school, but then holds them accountable for who they hire and what goes on in the school. I think that's a fundamentally different relationship than what the one that James articulated. But I think that's the healthy relationship of actually being engaged and not assuming that all of the knowledge, all of the experience is in one direction. I think it'd be actually in both directions.
That's great. I'd like to ask a little bit about an issue that actually hasn't really come up, except Robert brought it up earlier indirectly, and that's teacher pay. And I know this is one of those issues that there's a lot of research, and then there's contention, and there's a lot of argument about it. On the one side, people say, well, if we paid teachers more, the profession would be more prestigious, right? On the other side, maybe people are choosing education because they are making an intelligent trade-off about the kind of life they want to live, and therefore the salary should be reflective of that. So I'd like to just have each one of you reflect to me what your thoughts are on the question of teacher pay. Should we be trying at a policy level to increase it? Will school choice affect it? Just give us your reflections on this.
So Aaron, I think a lot of it is the latter. And one of James's classmates, Daniel Bowen, who's an ed school professor at Texas A&M, his dissertation was a laboratory experiment where he tested people's risk-reward ratio, and he tested students who were in our teacher preparation program, who were education majors, and students who were in our econ program, business majors. And he found a very different risk-reward ratio. The ed school majors, the education majors, were much more willing to trade off the possibility of big benefits for something that's certain. So there's kind of a certainty and stability bias in the attitudes and values of many people who go into education. That's what Dan concluded, and I think that's true. And I think they are willing to make those kinds of payoffs. Obviously, you get the summer open for free, and so those who want to make money can usually find employment during the summer and add a third of their base salary on top. And make a decent wage. Those who don't want to, who want their summers free, have that opportunity. So it has that benefit as well. In terms of promoting school choice, Certainly, as more schools are schools of choice, parents have more options. Some of those schools of choice will distinguish themselves by hiring rock star teachers, paying them rock star salaries, maybe having larger class sizes as a result, but more kids being taught by highly effective teachers. There'll be some of that. I don't think there'll be a lot of it. And my home state of Arkansas, basically they just used a big teacher salary raise as a ransom to get universal school choice. So every teacher, every public school teacher in the state got a big raise as part of the package of education reforms that included a universal ESA program. So it was a bit of a quid pro quo there. I wouldn't recommend that, because if you're paying the same human capital more, you're not necessarily going to get better results, and the economists would say that's the definition of inefficiency, is committing more resources to the same human capital.
So I first want to say the piece that you referred to with Dan Bowen, if you look it up, it's called Risky Business. You'll find me as a co-author on that piece. But we published in Education Economics. It was a great paper. You should look into it.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, shout out. So raising salary across the board. And let me say, I was a public school teacher. My wife is currently a public school teacher. Yes, please, right? I'll take more money. But the fact is, it's not going to solve any of the problems that we're talking about. What we really need is a cultural change in education. And this is similar to what I was talking about from the state level, but this is a local problem in many cases. So I have a buddy, for example, who worked many years in business, was terrific in project management and all these sorts of things, but he loves coaching track, so he decided to start coaching, and he decided to want to make a career move to become a teacher. So he goes through and gets certified, becomes a teacher, and even though he has a decade of experience in business, and he's hired to teach business, they bring him in at step one on the salary schedule, right? They don't bring him in with any years of experience towards, to count his job that he worked before. They bring him in as a brand new novice teacher. And so if we want to change the profession, what we have to change is that step and lane salary schedule. Mm-hmm. We have to have principals who are willing to say, I need a Spanish teacher, I'll pay you more to come teach Spanish. I need some special education teachers. I have too many first grade teachers. I was a first grade teacher. Hey, James, if you get this certified or you get this training, I'll pay you more to be the special education teacher. We have to have that change in dynamic in how we staff schools. And if we don't have that change in dynamic, we're not going to solve any of these sorts of problems. But I think this is where school choice starts to help, because school choice, hopefully, can change that dynamic, where we start paying teachers not based on performance on some metric where we evaluate them, but based on the really market competitiveness. It's harder to become a physics teacher, and there are few of them because they can earn more elsewhere. We should pay physics teachers more. These seem like simple practices that we have to put in place in education.
Thanks.
I'll just add in one thing. It's unanimous. We need to pay teachers more.
Especially my son.
Yeah, okay.
And my wife.
But I'll add in one additional element here that I think is important, is what we've seen anecdotally at Hillsdale. Prior to our move away from the certification program, I'll just be candid. The ed department was a place where the weaker students could hide. The courses were easier, they were easier to get through. When we abandoned that and began to offer courses with what I would call real content, it isn't just that the quantity of people taking our courses increased, it was the quality as well. And there are people in college where, yes, they're going to college to earn a living, to get a big salary, but there's always those students in there who want to give their lives to something noble. They go into mission work, they go into Peace Corps, they go into Teach for America, that kind of a thing. There are those people who would go into teaching, but the certification barrier is too great. When you drop that, you begin to see the teaching profession being held up as one of the noble things to pursue. And we have seen the quality of students at Hillsdale College enter into the teaching profession. Again, we have no certification, but anywhere from 12 to 15% of the graduating class goes into teaching every single year. And it's not that they're going because of the pay. They want to go and do something meaningful. And that's the response that we've seen.
That's great. We have 5 minutes left, so I think it's appropriate to ask a question that we could take an entire afternoon to answer, which is, will AI replace teachers?
Oh,
Dr.
I
Wolf.
just think education is such a personal, almost intimate kind of activity. Now, I know at times it makes sense for people to enroll in a virtual school and experience online education, given the circumstances of their lives. But I think education will primarily always be a very personal experience delivered by a human being in and around classrooms. So I think AI will evolve to being a tool that actual human beings learn or use to help children learn, but I don't think it will take over education and severely reduce or dramatically reduce the teacher workforce. That's my prognostication.
So I tried to test this morning. I tried to have a conversation with my phone, and I said, I would like you to conduct a Socratic seminar with me. And it told me to name the topic, and so I named the topic, and it was the worst Socratic seminar I have ever had in my life. It was my phone lecturing me about why my views on something were wrong, or why I should consider other positions. It was not a Socratic seminar at all. And maybe AI could be programmed better, and over time it could improve. I think AI could be terrific at indoctrination. And I don't mean just the type of negative indoctrination that you might normally think of. But I think of indoctrination, Mortimer Adler would oftentimes describe it as when you know the end result that you want a student to arrive at. When you have a lesson and you say, this is exactly where I want them to get, I want them to learn this, you're guiding them to a specific place, and they would call that indoctrination, even if it doesn't, without the negative connotation to that. AI could be terrific at teaching kids math, at teaching kids discrete concepts, but if we want to teach them to reason and to think and to hear what someone else is saying and respond to them and to read facial expressions, if we want them to be human, I think putting them in front of computers is probably a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I don't think AI is going away anytime soon. It's going to help us acquire information. It's going to help us to develop skills, but is it really going to be able to help us cultivate the affections? Is it going to help us to know what we should love? Is it going to help us to understand what the concept of joy is? Are we going to be more courageous? These things that you describe that make us who we are as human beings, I think that requires humanity. Wordsworth says, what we have loved, others will love, and we will teach them how, right? In order to teach people to be human, it requires humanity.
Well, thank you for that. And that leaves us time for Q&A. And so I'd like to open it up to the audience, both in person and online. You can ask your questions if you're online to joe.pitts, Pitts, @aei.org, I believe. So send your questions that way. And now we'll open it up. Guys.
So this AI thing, I got a newsletter from the Stand Together Foundation, which is a Charles Koch philanthropic organization, and they featured a school called the Alpha School. It is opening in, I believe, Arizona, Florida, New York. The one in New York is $60,000 a year, by the way. And their claim to fame is that using AI, they can teach children in 2 hours per day. 2 hours of academic time per day, and the rest of it is used, selling lemonade or apprenticing at a flower shop or whatever, having practical life experiences. So they are. I mean, I think it is short-sighted to say that, it's kind of like what iPhone was in 2006. Nobody could imagine that you literally don't need a laptop. You can just walk around with your iPhone and it can tell you your heart rate, how far you've gone, all sorts of things. So in 5 years, if Bill Gates and Elon Musk are telling me that, AI is going to be smarter than the smartest human on the planet, and a lot of jobs are going to be eliminated, I tend to get a little terrified. And I think if you pay the extra $20 for ChatGPT, it is scary how it can help you quit your shrink. And it actually is. It's true. I have friends who've literally stopped seeing their therapist because now they just go to ChatGPT, pay the $20. It's cheap and quick. Immediate gratification. But and in private schools, again, I'll go back to private schools, which is my lane. There is a de-emphasis of the role of the teacher. They now are starting to, even at the Alpha School, they are starting to call teachers guides. So my vision, as has been articulated by the NAIS since 2018, is that teachers will be replaced by guides who are completely inexperienced, getting paid $20 an hour to make sure children in project-based learning within the Mastery Transcript Consortium, which is mastery-based grading system, are going to be sitting around a table with their headphones on, using computers and AI and whatever else other tool, and the guide is walking around making sure these kids don't stab themselves with a dull knife.
May I respond? So I think what we're going to see in terms of AI is you will see some schools or some educators who go all in and want to harness AI and maybe can use it in some really useful ways. Maybe the woodworking teacher isn't great at teaching English literature, so maybe he's able to tap into some online tools to help teach kids, but he's able to teach woodworking or something along those lines. So I could see in some contexts it's going to be used, and it might be used well. I think in public schools it's probably going to be used to supplement instruction. Again, I was a first grade teacher, and I think you probably could cover a lot of content by putting kids in front of a computer and having them work through gamified situations where they're answering math problems and hopefully increasing their math skills. But you have to have the adults there. You have to have them teaching. You can learn just about anything you want online these days, but you have to want to learn it. And if no one's there inspiring you to want to learn it, kids could be doing all kinds of inappropriate things with AI or not doing anything at all. So there has to be some role for the classroom teacher, even in situations where you have that. And then you're going to have schools like Classical who say, none of this for us, please. We don't want any of this. And I think that's actually where we're seeing a lot of the movement in education right now, is you're seeing parents saying, we want less technology, not more. And so I think AI is not going to take over all of education. It's going to impact parts of it a lot, a big portion a little, and some of it none.
And I'll just add to that, I think school choice is actually going to do something interesting in this space. And it gets to what a theme we've been kind of touching on here, which is this top-down versus bottom-up. We're going to start to see what the revealed preferences are. We're going to find out if parents want, a situation where it's AI-enabled and there are guides, or we're going to find out if they're going to want classical education. They may want different things, but in a sense, the market is going to show us what the parents want. And ultimately, I think that's kind of what all of us have been talking about this morning, which is driving the decision-making down to the most local level, which is the family level, and not deigning to put ourselves in a position to sort of tell them what's best for them, right? Which is not a paternalistic point of view, but rather a perspective on human dignity there that I think is important. Are there other questions from the audience? Yes, his hand was up first. And then we'll come to you, Tracy.
Hi, I'm Matt. I work at that scrappy startup called Teach for America, and I did it a long time ago. I'd like to approach it, it's basing on your comments. Let's talk about Gen Z and whatever we're calling, I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old, whatever we're calling that generation. What aspects of education, whether it's school choice, the teacher training, what's going to make them want to become teachers? That's my question to this esteemed group.
Could we stop telling everyone it's terrible? Like, if we could just start there and start with what you talked about, that this is a great and noble profession. And the problem is that the biggest groups in support of teachers are the ones loudest saying how much it sucks, right? So if the unions would stop telling everyone that it sucks, that might be a little bit, we might be able to recruit people a little bit easier. When the truth is, it is a great profession. It was the only job where I got hugged every day, except for when I worked with Pat. It was the only job where my first graders came and gave me hugs every single day, and usually they were delighted to see me. It is a wonderful job, and we have to tell that story. We have to tell that to people. We cannot make it about, oh, it's low pay, and oh, it's all this. Like, yeah, there are challenges in teaching, but it is a rewarding profession, and we have to keep telling that story.
I'll add one thing, is that if you talk to people who want to be teachers, you ask them, why do you want to be a teacher? Oftentimes in that short conversation, they'll tell you it was because they had a teacher who impacted their life. They want to do the same, kind of a thing. That's why it matters who the person is, not just what they know and what they can do. And that's has an impact on AI. You're never going to have anyone choose the teaching profession because of their interaction with AI. It's because they saw a real human being doing noble work and they wanted to do the same work, even if it requires them to receive less pay.
And I'll just add, surveys indicate that one characteristic that makes Gen Z distinctive is they want variation in their lives, they want variation in their careers. That's a problem for the uniform salary schedule in public education, because that's really designed to reward the people who go the distance, who teach for 25 years or more in the same state, step and lane advancement. That's a really bad fit for the preferences and values of Gen Z. So I think they are going to gravitate to the alternative certification programs that aren't so rigid in the design of their reward system.
Tracy.
Yeah, to piggyback on those responses, the best teachers I had in my life growing up set high expectations for their students, but also provided great supports for us as well. How can teacher certification programs provide more mentoring support so that we can produce better teachers like that, instead of many of the teachers that we now have today that sort of institute the low expectations for students?
I think one of the things you can do is, and I kind of implied this in my comments, is that the relationship with the school changes. And it isn't as if the College of Education, the university or college, is providing a term around teacher education, classroom-ready teachers, which I think is a myth. I don't think you can prepare someone to the point where they could walk into a classroom and just be able to do this incredibly complex job. So what that does is it changes the relationship. And we, in conversation with schools, we tell them, you're going to have a lot of work to do, this onboarding process of bringing them into your community of a school. It requires matching those young, talented, smart, energetic, well-educated teachers with those veterans who have been doing it for 20, 25 years in kind of a mentoring relationship, so that this new college grad knows what to do when their third grader throws up on a desk. That veteran knows how to deal with that. So it requires creating a relationship within the school where the school takes responsibility and brings those new recruits on in a way, because it's impossible to get them completely ready for the classroom. You can provide them with the knowledge, with the content. You can give them exposure to classrooms while they're undergraduates, but there's nothing like having an experienced mentor in that kind of a relationship.
And I got anything to add there?
You go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, I'd love for you to finish us off. Yeah.
The war of the courtesies.
I was
Yes.
going to bring it back to the policy side. I am weary of any effort to try to mandate this from the state level and put in place a state curriculum for caring or something along those lines. I just don't think it's likely to happen. And in terms of, I think the panel might be titled something about higher education, but we just don't see much innovation in higher education, partly because of all the structures and the things that we've talked about. We have to change the regulatory environment to allow for different types of institutions to start. The Institute for Governance and Civics where I work, we are looking at starting a certificate program for classical education because the regulatory environment has made it so that we can, right? They don't have to go through the traditional public or college of education to get certified. We can do that by creating a new program for them. So we have to create an environment where different types of institutions can flourish, and hopefully, maybe with some guidance, we can get more institutions that are nurturing the types of things that you're talking about.
With that, I would invite you to thank our guests today for their wisdom and for joining us. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, welcome back. We are excited for this next conversation, alternative pathways for teacher preparation. I remember when I was at Teach for America, and we have two TFA folk here, in the very early days, 1992, I worked for TFA in the summer between my first and second year of business school, and then did the crazy thing, went full-time in 93. And it was the Wild West, it was who's this upstart organization? You're training teachers in 6 weeks. You're disrespecting the profession. Teachers of education were mad at us. And there are a lot of similarities, it feels like, to this era right now because there's so many different emerging models. Whereas Teach for America was doing non-traditional teacher preparation, but then basically placing them in traditional public schools. The three of you represent different ways that you're not only preparing teachers, you're also having the execution model as well. So I'm very excited for each of you to really have an opportunity to dive in and really just first explain what your model is, who the profile is of the teachers that come into your institutions. Very excited that we've got Kelly Smith, the founder of Prenda, which Kelly will tell you about, Matt Kramer, who's the CEO of Wildflower Foundation, another different type of micro school, and then Krista DeBoer, who's the executive director for the Center for Urban Teaching, that is preparing teachers in a whole unique way. So why don't we go across down the road and spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes just really giving folks a flavor of what is it, because I think there's a lot of discussion about this concept of micro schools or alternative delivery mechanisms. So Kelly, I will start with you.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks to AEI. This is great to be here, and I've already learned a lot through the discussion. My name's Kelly Smith. I started a micro school in my house in 2018. This came sort of by accident. I had a roundabout path through technology and parenting that sort of led me to a question, which was, why do my kids love learning? I could see them learn in engaging ways, and I had been running an after-school program at my local public library. I said, why do they love learning here and hate school? And it was a pretty naive question, I guess. It came from just direct observation. And I said, what if we did school differently in such a way that was really designed to help empower kids to be lifelong learners and make it all about them and their learning and their experience. And so notwithstanding my 0 credentials of any sort, I'm a dad. I've spent time around kids, but I didn't even know what I didn't know. There's so much that I was too naive to even realize that it might be offensive that I'm doing this. I got my kid out of school, and 6 of my friends pulled their kids out, and we did a micro school around my kitchen table. The goal of this school, again, was just to help these kids take ownership of their learning. I made up a model and a curriculum that fit with my intuition. Later found out, was gratifying actually, to realize that smart people have researched these things and have done things like personalizing education and making projects interesting that allow kids to ask questions and do inquiry. And I didn't know about Vygotsky and Piaget and all this stuff. But at the time, I'm just thinking, this makes learning come alive. And so let's try it out. And that pilot semester for me was transformational. It was a few months in January to May of 2018, where I got to see each of these 7 kids, each of them very different.
Pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID,
right?
as individuals, and each of them get to a point where there was fire in their eyes. There was excitement about learning. This old Plutarch quote that I love, just a fire to be kindled as opposed to a vessel filled. And I saw that, and having seen that, the parents saw it, the kids noticed it, word spread, and pretty soon we were doing 3 microschools in Arizona the next year. And then after that, it was 50 microschools. And then COVID came along and it was hundreds and hundreds of microschools. And we continue today to be supporting people. So Prenda as an organization, and I'm the founder and CEO of this company, is a company that helps people start microschools. The whole goal is to find somebody that cares about kids, that feels like they can have an impact in the lives of a small group of kids. Sometimes these are former teachers out of classrooms. Sometimes they're not. They could come from a parenting background or a community participant. To help these people get set up, there's basically 2 big hurdles. One of them on the business side. So to run your own micro school is a feat, right? You have to figure out how to market yourself and collect payment or organize your business. There's another side of this, which is how do you run a learning model that puts kids in the center and really empowers them and activates them as lifelong learners. We've given tools for both of those things. We've added it up. I told Matt this number. We've helped more than 1,000 people start microschools over these years, and each time it's different. They all look different. They're in different places all over the country, primarily funded through school choice programs. So if you go to the states that have really good ESA programs, those are the places you're likely to find a lot of Prenda microschools. And the purpose of that is most of the people we're working with are not folks who can afford private schools. So these are people that need that help. They pay taxes. They expect education to be free in return. And using school choice, it allows them to get, of course, not all of the money that they paid in taxes, but some portion of that money back to use for their kids' education. And so putting this all together, we're thrilled to be part of a movement that's strong and growing. We love helping people start microschools. Every time I meet, we call it a microschool guide, this person that's an entrepreneur/educator. And this person running the microschool, I'm inspired because you see different stories, different paths, but you see this impact that they're having one-on-one on a small group of kids in their community. And that's us in a nutshell.
That's great. Who was the teacher in that very first school?
I was.
You were the teacher. Wow. And are these technically private schools?
They are private schools, yes. Yeah, in the beginning, so this was pre-ESA programs for the most part. Arizona did have an ESA at the time. It was the only one in the country, and it was very limited to a certain subset of kids could get it. So there was no universal eligibility at that time. So what that meant was for me to make this program available for free to families, we did a partnership with charter schools and district schools, actually. We would go partner with the school. We would sign the kids up. So we operated inside of the system as well. I will just say we really have appreciated having the flexibility outside of the system as private schools to be able to do this in ways that we feel truly empower learners.
Got it. And before I go to Matt, so at the end, and the grades you serve?
Prenda supports K through 8.
Yep, so at the end of 8th grade, how do those students demonstrate that they've met state standards?
Yeah, I brought my son with me to Washington, D.C. He's actually out tooling around the city by himself right now, but he's a senior in high school. He was in that first class as a 5th grader. So he's my test on this. It's like, okay, how is he able to? And it was interesting to watch. He took an approach to school that in some ways mimicked my own. I was the kid that figured out the system and then put the minimum amount of work into the classes. I was very cynical as a student and got good grades, but didn't really learn anything. That was me in high school. He does that in some areas that he's not as excited about, but then he takes ownership in areas where he is excited, and he's gone deep on music, he's gone deep on entrepreneurship, he's gone deep on math, and political science/economics. These are areas that he gets excited about,
Yep.
And he's built these, almost crafted his own education pathway through the bigger system. So it's actually been fascinating to see what an empowered learner might do inside of an institution, as opposed to me as a kid. I was so used to just being a passive recipient of things, and I would just sort of go with the program. So to see him take an active role in his own education.
But was there an actual assessment that your students have to take at the end of 8th grade to prove any kind of
Yeah, so thankfully, 8th grade is sort of the end of the pre-serious, like things get semi-serious in high school with transcripts and things like that. And so no, it was just go to the school and say, here I am. I think he had to place into a math class or something, so he took their test for that. But
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to this point. Matt, let's talk about Wildflower.
Thanks for having me. I'm Matt Kramer. I was the kid your son was early on in my life. School did not fit well for me, so I had the beginning experience of that, and ended up in a Montessori school for wayward boys that my parents found, which really turned out to be quite helpful. And then the second experience that sort of influenced how all this got started for me was I spent a decade leading Teach for America. And saw over the course of a decade, we recruited a lot of really talented people, and we put them into classrooms, and got to see firsthand what the extraordinary leadership-destroying quality of the public school districts was when it came in contact with somebody who was really a strong-willed person, and sometimes the kids won that fight and sometimes the schools won that fight, but it was not a supportive environment for leadership. And so the things that have always been on my mind with respect to education have been both, how do you create an environment that is good for kids to follow their dreams, to become who they're meant to be, and also how do you create an environment that's good for teachers to follow their dreams, to become who they're meant to be. What Wildflower is that put in action. The idea is to create a tiny micro school environment that teachers create almost like, I don't use this word broadly, but it's helpful for describing, almost like a nonprofit franchise, a sort of system that they can adopt that creates a space in which they can bring Montessori practice to life for a group of kids. The schools are all tiny. The biggest they get is about 50 kids, generally 1 or 2 classrooms. They're all real Montessori schools. They're all over the place. We have them in 19 states now. They use a bunch of different governance structures. We have schools that operate as miniature charters. We have schools that operate as private schools that use tuition and ESAs. We have schools that operate as preschools that use childcare subsidy systems plus tuition. We have, basically wherever there's a method of creating economic access to schools that have the freedom to be teacher-led, we use that and have structured a way to get teachers to start their own schools. We have 73 of them now, and we're growing about 20% a year or so. That's Wildflower.
Got it. And in New York, the Wildflower, it's a public charter school.
It is.
Right, but in other states, it's just a private school?
We have charters in New York, DC, Colorado, Minnesota, and we just got approved in Ohio and Michigan. And then in other places that don't have good charter laws or have really good ESA laws, we will use those. The ESA laws are easier to work with, as Kelly said. But yeah, we do it in multiple different ways.
So which do you prefer?
The laws are never really apples to apples. Like, they have different amounts of money, they have different sets of rules. But if you're just asking me on the rules basis, I prefer ESAs.
Right.
yeah, Florida. We prefer Florida. Do it like that.
Do it like that. Right, because that's all the power in the hands of individual
I
parents.
spoke for you.
Yeah, no, I will. I think my view is that, it was interesting, the conversation we were having earlier today about accreditation and the role it plays. And, when I think about our teachers, they're trained Montessorians. But Montessori training goes through an entirely separate accreditation program in the U.S. There's AACTE, which everyone knows, and then there's, that covers the accreditation of 98% of the teachers. And then there's this thing called MACD, the Montessori Accreditation Council for Teacher Education. It's the one other national accreditation body in education, and the Montessorians all go through that little thing. So they're not really affected by the sort of culture within higher ed about education. To a great extent, even though some ed schools do offer Montessori programs, the culture is set by the outside of the system ones. And then also, I think they're shaped by the fact that the curriculum in Montessori, people are somewhat surprised to hear this, but Montessori curriculum is scripted. To become a Montessori teacher, you actually go memorize about 2,000 lessons. Each one has a piece of material associated with it, and you literally memorize the exact word you deliver to kids. And the reason why is Maria Montessori discovered 100 years ago that teachers go on too long if they're making it up on the fly. Whereas if you get them to memorize the introduction, it keeps you focused, succinct, you give the minimal amount there, and then you let the kids start doing stuff. And so the combination of a very structured curriculum, which happens to prioritize unstructured choice-based leadership on the part of the kids, but the structured curriculum and the teachers who are trained in a different environment about it, and a teacher system that prioritizes getting people, like Eva does before they have had other ideas about what it means to be a teacher put into their heads, that gives us a really different sense of like who the teachers are. It gives us different people with different dreams coming to us, and they react in different ways to autonomy.
Yeah. So we're going to come back for each of you to talk through how you prepare your teachers. But for Krista, let's talk about the Center for Urban Teaching, because you're not a micro school. However, you are preparing a wide range of teachers for an interesting wide range of ultimate placement. So tell us a little bit about CUT.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to those of you who spoke earlier. Just so much brilliance in this room. I appreciate you guys. The Center for Urban Teaching is different, Ian. Like you said, it's a nonprofit that actually exists to identify, prepare, and support high-performing urban teachers, leaders, and schools. And so one of the things that makes us unique from the rest of the panelists today, and as it relates to the larger discussion that's going on, is that we're not a school operator or an institute of higher ed. Rather, we're kind of a bridge that comes in between those two. So we really have an opportunity to work alongside of both school operators and also institutes of higher ed in helping identify talent. And in order to be a part of our program, you can come from any background. You can be an undergrad that is studying engineering, or you can be a traditional education major. So we kind of find anybody that is interested in potentially pursuing this particular profession. You can also be a second career candidate, a paraprofessional that's interested in becoming a lead teacher in a classroom. So we really are the bridge between those two entities, and we come alongside to provide kind of supplemental training and experience in order to help prepare teachers for the field. Our organization was actually founded inside of a college. So we were founded in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we got our start and where our heart is. And we were founded at Wisconsin Lutheran College by two professors who were really moved by the profound failure of traditional colleges of ed to prepare students to effectively serve in their own backyard in the community where the college existed. And so that's kind of where it started and got going. And we became an independent nonprofit in May of 2013 and went from working with 3 universities to now having students participating from over 80 universities in our program. And so one of the things that makes us unique, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, is just that we really we don't believe there's a silver bullet, so I'll just say that first and foremost. But some of the things that we know work for our formula that makes us distinctive is that we really focus on the person first. And I heard someone earlier today say that before they even look at what can they teach and how can they teach it, they really just want good people. And so we really focus on the person first, and then we also focus on calling over career. And so that's what motivates everybody that's in our pipeline. They're not looking at this as the next step to something. They believe that they're uniquely called to do this great work and to have an impact inside of our schools. And then we're very practical based. So we focus on experiential training, and then we provide ongoing support following them from college to the classroom.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So if someone comes into the center, are they credentialed at the end of the experience based on the relationship you have with the university? How does that work in terms of after they're done? What do they leave the institution with?
So in particular in the state of Wisconsin, in order to work within a choice school, so a private school, you have to at least have a bachelor's degree. So credentialed by the end, in order to go effectively serve in a school, you need to at least have that.
Yep.
And then as far as teacher licensure goes, that is a wide variety. That only happens if you're going into the traditional public school. You're required to have a license. So we kind of have everything across that spectrum. About 70% of our alumni serve in non-traditional private choice schools, and 30% are in public, 20% in public charter, and 10% in traditional district schools.
Interesting, but they generally want to stay in urban communities.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, so let's dive in now in more specifics on how you're developing the teachers themselves, because it sounds like you're not even really explicitly developing teachers.
Well, we don't hire, so we don't, first of all, we don't even use the word teacher. So that's, I guess, one.
that's one place to start.
and we really, this is maybe a reference back to you and Robert talking this morning, as you guys were saying things that to me just don't add up as a math problem. You need all these teachers, the job's already impossible, and we actually want to make it harder. So you put that all together. So the only answer in my head is you decouple. You say, what then can we ask for? And I ask for, I think very similar to what Chris is saying, is I want somebody who cares about kids, right? Number one, the market knows who cares about kids. This is a really interesting phenomenon. Someone raises their hand, they say, I'm gonna start a micro school. I've seen this happen, within minutes, there's a waiting list because somebody, like word spreads, people know each other, and it's like, oh, this person has plenty of people that want to send their kid just based on past experience, past knowing. So that's really a function of who you are already. Now the question is, okay, now I'm in here, I've got my micro school, Brenda helps them with all the logistics of setting it up, and they're gonna get paid, all of that. But what do they actually do? Some of those people do have a teaching background, and so they've got ideas, but sometimes even there we have to sort of rewire some things. We want a model that's student-led, so we tell them there's no lecture time. I agree with Maria Montessori. I think it's just too easy to to talk too much, right? And so we say what we're doing is in conquer mode. We sit down with the guide and the kid and the parent too, and they say, okay, here's where you're testing at math. Here's this is where you are. Where do you want to be by the end of the year? And they set a goal. And what's interesting is you'd think, okay, opening it up, that's scary because then kids will just sit around and do nothing. But these kids are ambitious. They set the average goal is 1.8 grade levels worth of growth that they want to see in a year. That's, some of those kids are behind, and so they're trying to catch up. But some of them are on track or even ahead, and they're still pushing. They're like, I want to do trig, like by the end of 8th grade or whatever. So you see these kids set ambitious goals. Now your job as the guide is to be on their side to support them through the daily grind. And Prenda's software tracks their progress so they can see, okay, I got to get this far each day. I got to move, this much. And you can see when you're ahead and behind. And so there's these sort of support and intervention, but it's a different role than what you'd expect. If somebody has to know all of the trig and then deliver lesson plans that are compelling and like talk to them the whole time, first of all, that's not real learning. That's sitting in a class. We've all done that. And then second, as I am learning, now I'm in this engaged posture, I'm trying to work my way through problems. Now I'm hungry for resources that will help me. I'm gonna watch the Khan Academy video, I'm gonna talk to the AI tutor that is available to me, I'm gonna ask other peers, I'm gonna go do whatever I can because learning is mine and I'm gonna achieve it. So you flip things completely around. And these are, again, not my ideas, these are things that wise educators have been trying to do in classrooms, I would say in spite of resistance from some of the structural limitations that they're up against.
So let me just make sure I understand. So I'm dissatisfied for whatever reason with my current school system. I have 5 other families or other families that are interested. We want to start a micro school.
Yep.
But I'm not a teacher.
Right.
So Prenda comes along, provides me all these resources. Do I, as an individual, also hire a teacher?
So we see both. We see some that will go actually find a teacher.
And they raise that financing?
Well, that money's going to come from, most of our micro schools are completely funded out of ESA dollars.
Oh.
So every family goes and signs up for the ESA program, X amount of dollars, minus Prenda's fee. This is what we can pay a teacher. And you can do that in a variety of ways. Now, oftentimes that is one of them, right? It's one of them, or it's somebody that they know. So during COVID, this got really crazy. I had neighbors and friends that were just minding their own business during COVID, and the moms of the neighborhood like almost pulled them out of their house, like a retired teacher, somebody that they just know to be good and safe with kids. It's like, you need to do this, we need you. And some of our best guides kind of came to it that way, where they were they were pulled in from the community.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So Matt, you're still Wild West, but you're a little bit more structured in that you are hiring teachers.
We are structured on the curriculum front.
Okay. So talk a little bit about that, and what's the training that a teacher gets to teach in a wildflower school?
So the Montessori training. So first of all, our philosophy of who the adults in the room are is very similar to Kelly's. We call them guides also.
So you don't use the term teacher either?
No, we refer to them as teacher leaders, but we refer to their classroom act as guiding.
And that's a Montessori thing.
That's a Montessori thing.
Yeah.
We did not make that up.
We also did not.
Yeah. We got it from the same place. So the training to be a Montessori teacher is, I mean, honestly, it's what you would imagine if you had not gotten caught off guard by the last 75 years of American higher ed teacher prep nonsense, right? It's very pragmatic. You learn to use the materials with the kids. There's some philosophy. It's about 10% of what you're taught. The rest of it is hands-on how to do it. The teachers who come to us mostly have been Montessori teachers for 5 or more years. We find it's good when you're trying to start your own school to have the classroom part of it in pretty good shape. They mostly come to us in one of a couple of mindsets. One of them is people come to us from private Montessori schools where they had gotten into this for a social mission purpose and convinced themselves that they were going to get to teach a lot of low-income kids in their private school, and that didn't work out. And they want to have a more diverse set of families and concluded they have to do it on their own to do that. The other is people who are teaching at public Montessori schools, and they're subject to the regulatory environments that affect public schools, and they conclude that they can't do Montessori the way it's supposed to be done. And so they come to us for that. And then there's a handful, I would say maybe 10% or so, who come to us who have been successful educators who have a Montessori philosophy but have not been Montessori trained, and we pay to send them to training because Montessori done right requires you to go through training. It's not a mindset. It's an actual curriculum.
Yep. So Krista, now when you're bringing in many different types of individuals into the center and preparing them for, do you place any of your teachers in micro schools?
We have some serving in micro schools, yes.
Got it. So how does that preparation shift, change at all? Like what are you doing to bring your candidates up for their development?
To develop them? Yeah, that's actually a really great question. So we actually think that while the models or flavors might change a little bit, that across all of these places, great teaching is just great teaching. And so while I know for a fact that Prenda and Wildflower look different, they're still gonna need some core competencies in order to go in and effectively teach. So how do we really do that? What's our model, our proven formula for success and our process for how we go about that? First thing is early recruitment. So we start working to recruit people into the field because we actually think teaching is an amazing profession and that lots of people should wanna do it. So we start working as early to recruit people as early as juniors and seniors in high school. So when this is over, I would like to talk to your son who's walking around DC right now. We celebrate that, and so we go in and we start talking to some of our high schools. We have a couple partnerships where they can actually come in and work with us in junior, senior year, and in between senior and freshman year of college to get some opportunities to start just like working with kids. So very early recruitment, very early on. And then the other things that are part of our development, again, this is not rocket science, but it's unique about how we do things, is exposure and experience. So if we want our people to replicate some of the amazing things that you've heard about that are happening in some of the schools that are being led, you want to go study those outliers, places that are getting exceptional results with students, and so taking them on immersion tours. So we really demystify the magic of what's happening in some of the schools by taking them into very high-performing classrooms, high-performing schools, and getting to see that great teaching happen. This sounds like, we know that in traditional colleges of ed, they usually are required to do clinicals. That's a normal part of it. However, there isn't the same level of, usually it's like who raised their hand and said they wanted somebody in their classroom, and oftentimes those are struggling teachers who are looking for an extra set of hands. And so we go along with them, and we actually go on the tour with them. We help demystify the magic, because the thing that a lot of times happens is when people who are not trained see really great teaching happen and see a highly functional classroom, they immediately think, wow, these kids in this classroom are so good. And they don't recognize that there's a difference. It's not the 5th grade classroom and the students are better than the 6th grade classroom. It's that the adult in front of that group of children is actually way more effective. So we believe that the teacher controls the conditions for success inside of the classroom. So we really do that part first, exposure. The other thing that we do is experience. So one of the things that we've noticed is that experience, we believe, is one of the best teachers. So getting people more at-bats, more opportunities to practice and hone their craft is a critical part of our program. So we have a 6-week summer internship that people who are interested in exploring this can be a part of. There are 11 days of really intensive training that our alumni often refer to lovingly as boot camp, because it's very intense. And it's very much focused on how do you effectively teach, and very little on philosophy and theory. I think that is one of the things that in most traditional institutes of higher ed, it is just a lot of philosophy and theory, and no, actually, how do I do this thing? And classroom management is also one of the core focuses. How do you manage a classroom? How do you build a culture that you want to see in your school? Because the reality is that whether you choose to, as a teacher or a school, set the culture, you're going to get one. And if you allow one to be set for you, it may not be the one that you wanted. So we really train them specifically, how do you effectively teach? How do you effectively manage? All of the things that go into teaching that usually are the things that are frustrating factors for teachers. It's not so much the lesson planning, right, or those things. It's all of the other things that drag down teachers. And then they get an opportunity to actually practice. And it's different than student teaching, because our schools that are partnered with us give us 2 things. They give us the keys and the kids. And they let us take all of our participants into their building, and they get to assume the full responsibility of what it means to be a teacher. So there isn't a supervisor that's going to step in and take the person that owns that classroom isn't there. And I know, because I was a teacher, that my little look from the corner of the room can write a whole thing, right? Because the kids know me. So my factor that I was in there, even if I wasn't saying words or teaching specifically, was impacting what was happening in that classroom. And so they get to really assume that. And it's kind of, through that experience, people either fall more in love with this calling and this career, or we help sometimes coach people out.
Yep.
And that I think is a really critical thing. Because if you can't cut it in 4 weeks, which is 20 days of instruction, you probably don't have any business being in front of children for an entire year, and definitely shouldn't be given the keys to starting a micro school or something like that. And then the last part is ongoing support. So our program doesn't end when you get placed. And that's another thing that makes us unique, is that we follow our alumni from college into the classroom and give them 2 years of ongoing support through individualized intensive coaching, through professional development as well. And when they're first getting ready to take that first job, we also offer career counseling and kind of, go through a speed dating process almost, where they help find the schools that align with what they want to see in the culture and in the philosophy of how the school is operating.
Yeah, so the couple of things about what you just said, I really like the early recruitment component of what you just said, because you're reaching kids in junior and senior year of high school.
Yes.
So this is kind of a pipeline solution. I guess, full disclosure, I didn't mention that our high school, Vertex Partnership Academies, several of our juniors are now partnered with a wildflower school also in the Bronx.
Wow.
So every couple of weeks, they go as part of their Montessori training, and at the end of junior and senior year of high school, they will actually have a credential where they can become an assistant teacher in a
We will
Montessori.
try to hire them.
Yeah, and the goal and my hope is to build a formal relationship where our high school graduates are now have a fast track into a Montessori career, early childhood development. Are you guys doing anything as it relates to this kind of pipeline development of teachers?
I'm not. So yeah, our pipeline is typically people, I would guess the average age of our guides are in their 40s. So, they're coming from either a career teaching, there's a variety of reasons that lead people to us. I think it's interesting to hear Matt talk about who comes to them. We have the people that leave education are often, I think the folks that we've been talking about all day, that we really would love every educator to be like this. It doesn't take many sort of head face plants into brick walls to quit. And it really is frustrating. I mean, some of the stories that I hear are heartbreaking in that they describe hard work and sacrifice to create educational experiences for kids often in an inner city school that needs it a lot. And they've created something amazing. And it's not even that they ran into, regulatory hurdles internally and like there's a state rule and the district won't let me do this. We hear that, but they're fine with that. It's the other teachers that are like, you're making us look bad. You need to cool it. Like these are real stories that are happening every day. So no matter how good of a job we do, training these people, and I support and laud all of the effort, right? It's like somehow that structure, that culture and the structure needs to change because otherwise those people are gonna run out the door, and that's what they're doing. We get these stories. I was talking to a guide in New Hampshire. We were doing a big project, and she said, my moment was looking at my contract. They gave it to me, and I had it on my desk in the back of the classroom. She's like, I'm looking at these kids who I love, and you could tell, she just one of these people that like has the heart. And I'm looking at this contract, and I'm just like, I can't, in integrity, I can't do it. So she doesn't sign the contract. She starts her micro school. She's now got 10 kids that she's able to create the learning environment that she always wanted to do anyway. Now, does she need help? Yes, of course, but it's not about, it didn't take us 20 years to cultivate that. Like life did that for her. And then we just were there for her to help her get started when the time was right.
Got it. So outside of our relationship, are you doing anything more in terms of cultivating?
Yeah, I mean, we basically have, once the schools are set up, they have their own talent questions. Our schools typically have the two educators who started the school, and they typically have a couple of assistants working there too. Some of those schools have figured out how to have those people be on a pathway to becoming teachers, and so we have a handful of schools that have produced many times more teachers than they themselves have. They just keep spinning off more schools. Other schools don't do that. But we love it when we see it, and we hope to keep encouraging people to do that.
Yeah, it is interesting when we talk about CTE. We're often talking about the trades or auto mechanics or stuff like that. We rarely talk about creating teacher pathways. I think would be very powerful.
I have a friend from the education world that we're all in who ran a big early college program of like a first 2 years of college sort of before releasing kids into the broader college world. And he said, their idea was sort of borrowing from Cristo Rey and others. They were going to have internships.
Yeah, right.
And what he said, he was shocked. He said he was in it for about a year. He said the number one trade the kids want to learn is how to be an educator. He said by far. He said we're thinking about internships at companies, whatever. They want to be teachers.
Right. By the way, Cristo Rey is a model that has their students in high school from 9th grade. They're working 1 day a week in a whole bunch of industries. But this is, I wonder if micro schools, this concept, just creates a new avenue to create a new pipeline earlier.
This is interesting, Ian. I said no, right? And now I'm listening to this. Like, I've actually met mothers of 18-year-olds who bring their 18-year-old in to help with the micro school. And I'm surprised I didn't even think of this. Literally the next year, the daughter runs her own micro school. So yeah, we have a development.
I have been in 3 mother-daughter schools in the last 2 weeks.
It's amazing. So I've seen it. I didn't think of it because it's not something we did top down at all. It's a very emergent phenomenon.
I think this is an area that should be elevated.
I think one of the things that we just observe generally is when you take away the institutional, bureaucratic, sort of structural forces, and you let people act like human beings, a lot of the same patterns emerge. Like the pattern of taking an apprentice under your wing and helping them. Sometimes it's your kids, sometimes it's your friend's kids, sometimes it's somebody you just met. But these sort of patterns, these are like old patterns, thousands of years old. When you take down the structures of AACTE, these things reemerge.
All right, before we get to questions, so please get your questions ready. You can, if you're online, you can email joe.pitts@aei.org, P-I-T-T-S. One thing you mentioned, Kelly, is that it seems like the schools that are formed are often formed by cohorts of parents that are coming together. Like they're not just individuals saying, I want to go to Apprenda school. Is that the case?
Yeah, it's an emergent phenomenon to get to, that starting point. I will say there's a galvanizing around a person. So typically, step one is more important than the space or the program is who's the person, and does that person have, are they the type of person that other parents will meet and say, yes, I want my child with you.
Got it.
Yeah.
And are you finding, is it similar for you?
Exactly the same for us.
Exactly the same thing. Yeah. Got it. But Krista, for you, again, you're running a center. Folks are coming to you as individuals and then seeking out a school environment that they think would mesh with their priorities.
Yes, that's definitely correct. I think one of the things that we look for, well, sometimes honestly, some of the candidates that we're talking to haven't considered teaching as a career. But when we find them, we say, have you thought about this? Is this something that you would be interested in? And that's what kind of draws them in then. And one of the things that we look for in our candidates is just alignment. I think alignment is so key. In it doesn't matter what type of school you're running. Do they need to have the competencies? Absolutely. They need to have alignment in the model that you're supporting. At Seafoot, our model is very our philosophy of what makes a great school is high expectations behaviorally and academically. Relationships built on respect, trust, and open communication, and a moral compass as well. So I think belief in your why or your moral compass is critical, which gets into moral virtues and things like that. And ultimately, you also have to have a belief in the students. I mean, research has shown a bunch of times that collective efficacy, which costs nothing and yet is so impactful, is not just about how do I feel about myself and what I can accomplish in my classroom, but do I believe in the rest of the people around me and how far we can move the needle? Trust matters in schools and alignment matters. Yesterday when we were flying in, I saw a rowing team, and it was punching the point as I was thinking about what we were talking about. You have to all be rowing in the same direction if you're in that boat. And if you are not committed to that, then get out of that boat. Don't try to steer the boat in a different direction. There's plenty of models and opportunity. I loved earlier today when we talked about school choice, not just as an amazing opportunity for parents and students and families, but also an amazing opportunity for teachers to have choice too. And so that alignment, I just think, is so critical. And knowing who you are and what you believe and seeking that in every single teacher that you are vetting and bringing along with you.
Yep. And one last question before we go to questions. I know we've got a number of folks writing policy and congression on Capitol Hill watching. Sounds like from a policy perspective, what has really unleashed this model are the ESAs, the vouchers. What else should be happening right now from a policy perspective that would really drive the growth of micro schools and other alternative formats?
So I'll say ESA, yes. And what we're watching as ESA programs emerge across the country, and each state gets to do it differently, is variety of strings attached to ESA. So ESA with a regulation. So Texas, we're all thrilled, passed a huge ESA, $1 billion. Texas said you have to use that money for an accredited private school in their law. So what that essentially means is we've got systems of accreditation and state certification that we've already talked about this morning that are interwoven into that.
And that's a bad thing.
To me, that means you can't step up and run a micro school the way you want to run it, the way your parents want you to run it. So you could have a group of people that wants to do education, and now You know, it was almost, you can have,
So close.
you could have this money, but oh no, you can only have the money if you do it this way that we've already talked about. It isn't leading to the outcomes that we want. So I think.
So should the federal go? So what's the incentive for states to pass ESAs but to excise these?
I would try to make them as, free of those types of restrictions as you possibly can.
Okay.
We've got a school starting in DC right now under the Opportunity Scholars Program, and they require accreditation before you can take the payments. And so the school, which would like to serve mostly low-income kids, is going to have to spend 3 years in its pre-accreditation process getting funded entirely by tuition, which means it's only going to have rich kids.
Oh my gosh.
Right? And then after 3 years, then it can start taking the Opportunity Scholars payments. That is nuts.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what do you do about that?
Well, we're getting help from a variety of people who think that's nuts and are trying to help clear the path for us. We're working with accrediting bodies who try to see the world more flexibly, but it's challenging.
Yeah, and for you guys, you're most susceptible to state laws, presumably. Does the federal government have a role to play here?
So I would say that for us, the space, like the distinctions between ESAs and charters are interesting for us. There are strengths to both approaches that I think the other could borrow. I'll just give one example. In the world of charters, a core philosophy is that education is a supply-driven market, that actually the key thing is to focus on the teachers who are going to create the schools, and that's why we have the federal charter school program. That's why the Walton family was giving away a lot of money to people to do planning grants, is because they realized that just having the demand for people out there would not generate the supply. I think in the ESA world, there is more belief in the power of the market. But I was just in Florida and I was talking to one of the folks from Step Up, and they were explaining to me that actually they think they should have 10 times as many new private schools starting a year as they do, given the demand situation. But the supply does not follow demand in ESAs either. And so one thing that I think the ESA world can learn from the charter world is you need to think about what the context is of a person who is about to sit down and start apprentice school and how to make their life easier. Mm-hmm. What is the access to startup grants you need? How do you get the low interest loans you need? We have all solved these problems in the charter world, right? We have federal money that goes in to provide the low tranche of debt funding to make it easier to get real estate. All these things, none of those things exist for ESAs. So that, and then on the other side, I think the charter world should realize that in only a couple places, really Arizona and New Mexico, do we have charter laws that are really, maybe Idaho, that are really designed to support 30-kid schools? Right? Everywhere else, the model of what the compliance world looks like is designed to support a 300-kid school and all the infrastructure behind it. And if you look at what Arizona and New Mexico and Idaho do, you're like, oh, actually, those are charter schools. They're using a charter framework. They're just designed to be 30-kid schools. And I think if the charter world, and the federal government does play a role in that because it shapes a lot of the things that become charter law.
No, that's so interesting, because I'm just realizing in New York, I think you have to have at least 220 kids by your third year in order to be a charter. Interesting. Krista, are there any policies that would help in the growth for CUT or CUT-like institutions?
Mm-hmm. How long do we have? No. I think, as I think about this, there's so many thoughts that I have because I feel like specific to our work, two things are really important. Policies that help impact the choice-specific schools, offering more opportunities for that, and also the teacher pathways. And I think as I was thinking through everything, one of the things that just kept coming back to mind for me is what gets celebrated is what gets replicated. And so one of the encouragements that I would give to the federal administration is just there's a lot of conversation right now and attention being given to disincentives and consequences. And how can the federal government incentivize some of the practices and models that they wish to see replicated? Specifically for where we work, some of the things that we would love to see more of, funding. Equal funding across sectors would be phenomenal. The formula that exists right now for title funds at the federal level, also there's a concentration piece that comes into that. So students that qualify in different districts are getting more than others. And so seeing that, kind of replicated or changed to make a difference. I think specifically in the state of Wisconsin, flexibility and the distribution of funds would be so welcomed. And by that, I mean we have a unique barrier in the state of Wisconsin right now with a state education agency in DPI. and they will likely never be compliant with any of the requests that are coming out of the Department of Education right now with the mandates. So we are looking at a place where Wisconsin federal funds could literally be shut off due to politics by our Department of Public Instruction. And so one of the things that could solve for that is we would just love to see an opportunity for private schools to have their own LEA, so they wouldn't have to funnel everything through the public school district. And I think that could really save on the skim and be more efficient. So like right now, about 35% is taken through like a skim before, of every dollar before it ever gets to an actual student. And as far as like the teacher pathways side of that goes, I mean, that's like such a long conversation, but I'll hit a couple highlights if that's okay.
Okay.
I think one would just be making teach grants simpler so teachers can get the money intended for them. And I know that some of the recent talks and dialogue have some of these things all on the chopping block. So since I have a moment, I'm gonna advocate for, and perhaps we wanna reconsider that decision. Teacher apprenticeships, Penny Schwinn invented them. We talked about them earlier today. I think those are very powerful. Right now, as like our program exists, that summer piece that I talked to you about, that's so critical, there is no federal funding available to come alongside of a program like that. And a lot of the new, there's an apprenticeship effort in Wisconsin, I'll say that, but it's being slow rolled and really tied up into not being anything new. It goes back to this idea of the idea sounded good, and now it's really just going through the traditional Institute of Higher Ed and the program, and then having to do the internship on top of it. And I think that goes back to what some people were talking about earlier, which is we need to look at the accreditation process for institutes of higher ed. Again, I'm not an institute of higher ed, but if you want to see really innovative things happen, then for a university to receive federal funding right now, accreditation is needed. And so if we want to see more institutes of higher ed and programs like the Center for Urban Teaching expand and do some new things, I think we should look at how to make federal dollars available to support those efforts.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Let us move. Oh, we have a few questions. Yep.
Arm wrestle.
Patrick Wolf, yeah.
So in the 1920s, Harvard President James Conant pushed for the large comprehensive high school as a model for education. And of course, it caught fire, spilled over into junior high, middle school, and elementary school too. And he justified it as schools have to be large because of economies of scale, and high schools have to be comprehensive because every student has to have access to calculus and 5 foreign languages and theater and all that kind of stuff. So micro schools are clear violations of large comprehensive schools. So how do you make the finances work, and how do you confront the idea that the children will get there's a very narrow curriculum because you can't cover everything. A single teacher can't cover everything. Right. And Kelly, Prentice should become an accreditor of micro schools.
I'll just say, Conant, I think got this wrong partly in his time and partly in our time. The part that was wrong in his time, we didn't know it at the time, but there are diseconomies of scale in schooling. The reason why there are diseconomies of scale have primarily to do with union management dynamics, that the intersection between unions and management, I don't particularly blame either side for this, but together they've doubled the number of adults per kid over the course of the last 40 years. That's why it costs more to run big comprehensive schools, because they become union labor management dynamic fights. And that could have been foreseen at the time. Certainly, President Roosevelt at the time foresaw it when he made his comments about public unions. And then, in our time, the internet has changed the question of whether you need all the expertise in the building. So my view is neither of the main arguments for large schools hold water today.
Yeah, and some of them maybe never did. I mean, I will just say, I get it. I mean, you were watching Henry Ford at the time, like make cars this way, and it was a really good way to make cars. It really was. So, I think, all due respect to Mr. Cohn, it's like, I think what is better than that, I think most of us would say is, Alexander the Great's dad like pulled Aristotle across the sea to like be his personal tutor and guide, and that was pretty awesome. I would say, I think if you want to approximate that for every kid in the world, it's closer now. I mean, you have not only the internet, but artificial intelligence, and there's tools. I mean, it's been a long time since, like, if I wanted to do something around my house or in my life, I would go enroll for a course. Like, I get on YouTube and I figure it out. And this is like a very normal learner behavior that all of us get in certain domains. It's spilled over into work. I mean, when I was learning some basic like spreadsheet stuff when I first started my career, I was on Stack Overflow every day. It was just like, what do you don't need, the assumption is in order to learn something, you have to sit still while someone tells it to you. And that, if you say it like that, it's ridiculous. And I think all of us would agree. So that's no longer true. It hasn't been true for a long time. And I think what we're trying to do is reflect that in a model that, it works differently.
Well, let me just follow up though on Patrick's question. So you're K-8, right?
K-8.
Are you planning to launch high schools?
Someday.
Someday.
Yeah.
And you run high schools.
We already
now.
have high schools.
Right. And so do you, from the student perspective, do you see any different? I went to Brooklyn Tech that had 5,000 kids and 14 majors and all sorts of things that honestly was a luxury. So from the kid perspective, do you see any shortcoming in the education that they receive?
I mean, I would say the kids at our schools with 30 kids have far more many major options than Brooklyn Tech has, right? Because you guys are still limited by somebody coming up with 40 things and saying, these are the disciplines you can study. And in a micro school, the kids can make up anything they want.
The world has thousands, right?
The world has so much more optionality.
All right.
So Kelly and Matthew, I'm interested to know if you've done any analysis about I wanted to say teacher pay, but they're not teachers. So your facilitator, your guides, whatever you would call them. Have you done any analysis about teacher pay? How much are the people earning on average? What are the highest people earning in these schools? And if you haven't studied this, I think I know a guy.
We've studied it ourselves, but we would love university assistance in studying it because we don't publish ourselves. We find that our teachers earn about 25% more than center directors for early childhood programs who are running like big programs. And they earn about 75% more than early childhood educators. And then at the elementary level, they're about 25% more than equivalent.
Wow, that's a lot of percents.
Yeah. So basically, generally speaking, they are above what everything else is. And it's because half of their, if you think about the underlying economics of the micro school, half of their pay is set by the fact that they do a classroom teaching role, and half of their pay is set by the fact that they do a school leadership role. And their pay represents a blend.
Yeah, ours is not that great of a story. Unfortunately, we made a decision to operate mostly in ESA states, so a majority of our kids are not taking a single dollar from parents above and beyond what they can get from the state. And that's a number that's deliberately set less than in Arizona. It's, they're getting $7,000. The school districts spend 10. Other states it's 12, 14, 20,000. So we're working on small numbers, which means these guides, the pay is not at the same level. It's not parity, especially if you consider some of the benefits, but it's not that far off. And so I think that's the key. There's this tipping point that's pretty close, I think, as we are able to get this going. We do have guides who build up, I'll call them empires for lack of a better word, but they're a small subset. These are the entrepreneurs of the set that then go out and find other people, and they've got like 7 tiny micro schools in a small town. Sometimes they're taking 10% of the kids like from the school district. And those people are able to put together an income that's more than what you'd get as a classroom teacher. But looking at numbers like, $50,000 a year or something like that, which it's less time, it's more flexibility and freedom. They actually like their work. It's not terrible, but it's not like this is going to straight up displace. I have teacher friends who, from the very beginning I've been doing this, they're like, tell me what it is, what is it? Because they're ready to do it, but they only, they've got a few years left to retirement, their pension's all tied up in it, so their plan is basically retire and then and then do a micro school.
And one of the key things is, from our perspective, is that student-teacher ratios have everything to do with what the economics of this work out to. And in the Montessori world, we like high student-teacher ratios. 30-to-1 is sort of considered a typical target, and that really shapes the economics.
And we do 10-to-1, yeah. So.
Yeah. All right, so we have 2 final questions here and then there.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for what you shared. So it's kind of funny. I actually am a teacher. I took a day off to just come and listen and learn. It's really, but of course, in the past, I worked in policy and innovation and whatnot. But what I'm saying is that listening to everything that's being shared, I can't help but hear the ghost of John Dewey come up from 1896 to 1900. And, thinking about that part about, yes, the word guide sounds nice, teacher leader sounds very inspiring, but what I just keep going back to really thinking about is education is very complex from a local, state, national, international. And my question is, when we're looking at school choice, how can we ensure that the students are being prepared not just for today, but also for tomorrow, and then also ensuring that whether it's through research, regulation, of course, ensuring that we're not socially reproducing the same thing across the board, ensuring that with what is being developed with our students, that we're also strengthening and not undermining American democracy as well as values.
Can I go first? It's a big one. So I'll take the two pieces. One of them is just fidelity to metrics, right? What is your goal in education? I would say for a long time we've allowed that to be set for us. You look at, even the good things that have come from No Child Left Behind and some of these things, it's, if the state's saying this is the goal of education, then here's the hoop, everyone just starts jumping through the hoop, and that happens. So that's kind of the norm that we're up against. We actually feel differently about it. We think that and I've been encouraged to see school districts set, for example, profile of a graduate, and they'll describe what they would like to see in a student. Now, these are hard to measure, of course. We're actually taking steps to do that and to facilitate a conversation, but with room to say, there's not one answer to that question, right? And so we want to allow for a pluralism of possibilities in terms of what are we here to do? What's the goal of our school? Now, in terms of universal glue of society, I will just say that's complicated. What we've decided as part of our individual goals. So the mission of Prenda is to empower learners, and we mean something very specific with those words. So there's this kind of picture. In fact, I wrote a book about it. It's like, this is what we're going for. And that's universal. Thanks, Aaron. This is what we're going for across the board. And we do try to sort of instill that. And a huge part of that is engagement in community. What does it mean to be a learner in kind of relativity with others? You can facilitate. A lot of people told me early on, they said, look, it's only 10 kids. I'm worried about the social aspect, right? It's a small group. My class had 7 kids. I said, follow your kid around in a big classroom with a stopwatch and see how much practice they're actually getting. Like, add it up. I guarantee you they're getting just deeper, more meaningful, real, frequent reps at interacting and thinking and dialogue with other people in a microschool. And then we connect them, with other microschools, and there's cool things that you can do. But it's a bigger question. It's a bigger ideal. I spend time thinking about this as well. I just don't think that the system as it is going to solve that problem. So I think it's on us to get together as a world and figure it out.
Got it. Okay. And final question.
Have you found over the years that traditional homeschooling parents are disbanding and moving their children into the micro schools?
There's 2 types. I'll talk quickly about this, and then I'd love to hear what you say too, Matt. There's 2 types of homeschoolers. There's a group that's very ideologically driven. It's like, this is about parent-child relationships. Sometimes it has a religious element in it. It's definitely ideological. And those people hate me more than teachers' unions. I will just say, they feel threatened by and opposed to what we're doing because they see this as antipathetic. And what we're doing.
Antithetical.
Is that a word? Antithetical.
Antithetical.
All right. But what's interesting is those people are loud in the forums, and they're the kind of queen bee homeschooler. There's a lot of people that are lurking in those networks that are like, I don't want to be her. I can't be her. That's way too much work. I want my kid around other kids. So they've done homeschool for different reasons than that. And those people love microschool. At the beginning, it was more than half of our people came from homeschool. It's now less than that. It's maybe a third. But it's homeschoolers and friends. You can think of these micro schools as being some blend, and you see people now that are like, oh, what are you doing? Like, that doesn't seem so weird, like it's just gradually catching on. And so as more and more people get used to it, yeah, it's a way to bring some of the ideas of homeschool to a lot more people.
Yeah, the vast majority of the people we encounter who are homeschoolers are reluctantly so. They're homeschooling because the best alternative option is no good. And if they could have a environment that really represented everything they think about what schooling should be like without having to personally quit their job and run it,
yeah,
that's what their first choice would be, which is why our whole idea is teacher-centered. We don't think parents actually want parent-centered schools for the most part. We think they want teacher-centered schools. They just want aligned, supportive, responsive teacher-supported schools.
Yeah.
Ian, can I just say
Yeah,
something? I'm going to go back to this young gentleman over here that took a day off from teaching to come be part of this conversation. And I wanted to say to you that it's people like you that are going to drive change in our schools.
She's about to hire you.
So we can talk about policy, we can talk about funding. Those things support opportunities for change, but at the end of the day, you can't force people to love kids and want to learn and grow. And that is my encouragement to you, that I think that policy and standards and all of these things that we're talking about are incredibly important. And in my specific state, there's a huge conversation happening right now about our state report card. But at the end of the day, the tests, the assessments, the accreditation, the policy, the funding doesn't teach children. The teachers do. And so I'd just love to leave you with that thought, and in general, this idea that, never doubt that a thoughtful, committed group of people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And if my founder was here, he would look at you and say, never doubt that God can do great things through you.
Wow, I can think of no better way to end this conference. Well, Aaron's going to close us out, but please, round of applause. Krista, Matt, Kelly, thank you. Okay.
Thank you all for sticking around. I wanted to just wrap us up with a few observations this afternoon, kind of sum up a few things. As you heard from Ian and Robert earlier, the topic here is, school choice. I mean, it's happening, right? The thing that Milton Friedman talked about those many years ago is coming to fruition, and now we have a new world that we're operating in, and we've got new questions to answer and new institutions that need to arise to answer those questions. So I would like to talk a little bit about the school choice bill that just passed in Texas, then about the kind of current trends we're already seeing, that the policy shift is likely to accelerate, and its impact on teachers, leaders, entrepreneurs, and families. And then I'll note briefly how we at the Center for Education and Public Service at the University of Austin are setting about to meet this moment. So just briefly, there are about 488,000 students currently participating in ESAs in other states. Texas will add 100,000 to that count. So just to give you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about here, I think that does it pretty well. The amount will be up to 10,800 and up to 30,000 for special needs. Median tuition for private schools in Texas is 9,500. Homeschoolers can get 2,000. Lower income special needs students will be prioritized. There was a conversation earlier about accreditation. Yes, accreditation is required. Also, another thing in the bill is that recognition by the Texas Education Agency could also be part of that qualification, so keep that in mind. And I'll get back to the issue of accreditation in a moment. Eligible expenses, we all know the drill, accredited private schools. In this one I'll come back to, nonprofit higher education institutions, industry-recognized workforce programs, tutoring, transportation, and other things of that nature. So while any policy framework can be improved, we're off to a really strong start in Texas. It's been decades in the making. I will add something that Robert mentioned earlier about the need for high-quality instructional materials and working with the Army we have. Last session, Texas passed a large bill, HB 1605, that infused a lot of resources into high-quality instructional materials in the classrooms. And these materials, if you look at them, are very inspired by E.D. Hirsch's work. So I think that's not the whole solution, but if you are looking at practical solutions that states could take up for the students currently in public schools, that's a good place to start. So one trend is the parent demand side. So what are we seeing already? In Texas, we have about 620,000 homeschooled students. It's about 10% of the school-age population. That number has eclipsed the number of charter school students in Texas, where we've got about 422,000. Now, that would be higher if we had more capacity, if the seats could open and we could allow the 79,000 students that are on wait lists to get off the wait list. So keep that in mind. There is revealed parent demand right there in that wait list number. About 279,000 students attend private school in Texas. So that's just to give you a sense of who's already choosing, right? Because parents are already choosing. If we zoom into the community we're serving, which is Austin, it's simply buzzing with educational innovation. It's just electric. Even in 1990, when my family moved to the area, homeschool co-ops, which we participated in because I was homeschooled all the way through, were plentiful and they were high quality. In fact, some of those homeschool co-ops turned into some of the most desirable private schools in Austin. They evolved into these private institutions. And the options have only proliferated ever since then. And we've got some great relationships with some great micro schools in Austin at the center. So we know that parents are already looking for, finding, and creating other options. We know from other states that the landscape is going to change for teachers as well. The number of new private schools in Florida increased 900 from 2055 to nearly 3,000 since 2010. That's huge. The number of students in private schools was also up dramatically. It's up to 15% of the school-age population in Florida. Their homeschool number, interestingly enough, is 6.4%, which is lower than Texas's, and I think it kind of gets to that question earlier, is what's the population shift? Are there parents in Florida that were homeschooling and then realized they wanted to be in a private school or micro school? I suspect that might have something to do with that. Another trend that I'm looking at that I'd like to see more attention paid to is this thing that goes by a lot of different names, but one of them is the Great Merge. We have seen that, so in the K-12 world, in the economics of K-12, high school is generally considered more expensive than K-8, right? Maybe it's because you've got to pay for more specialized teachers or all kinds of different things. So we know this is a fact. We also know, interestingly enough, that there is this huge enrollment cliff in higher education, right? So you've got these four-year institutions that have presumably wonderful teachers. A lot of these small liberal arts schools do. But they are not attracting enough students because they're just, demographic trends being what they are. Now, one thing that I mentioned earlier is that Texas allows post-secondary tuition to be used for used with an ESA. I think what we need to be thinking about is the fact that if we got started with college earlier, that would address a lot of the current needs that Gen Z is talking about and Gen Alpha. They're concerned about student debt. A lot of young men are disengaged. And you have sort of a skepticism about college in general. So one thought would be, if higher education were to sort of start to think about itself as how could it modify itself to start serving in a real way, 16, 17-year-olds that are advanced and want to get a liberal arts education, that might be one way to address the demand side that they've got. The other thing is that it would allow students to potentially finish college earlier, which addresses the question of opportunity cost. You asked about dual credit. Dual credit is not always transferable, right? And it oftentimes, really, the value proposition for dual credit is really on the college side, right? The college is providing the value proposition, not so much the high school. So I'm just proposing maybe get rid of the middleman. So what are some of the implications for these trends? One is what's been discussed earlier, entrepreneurial opportunities for teachers. So I think that's going to mean that you're going to get a different kind of population of people in the teaching profession. But it doesn't stop at teachers, and I want to talk about this, it's important. We're talking about the need for new institutions. So we heard a lot today about, I don't know, curriculum. We heard a lot today about accreditation, right? Testing. We talk about these things. Maybe we need more bespoke systems that actually accommodate the variety of kinds of schools that we're seeing that are emerging. So think about that. It's not just school creation. It's a whole ecosystem of institutions. We are going to be seeing more flexibility in the teaching profession, which means we could have more people who are full-time working doing something else coming in and tutoring. Tutoring is an allowable expense under an ESA. We might see more tradespeople. I love the story earlier about the tradesmen in Arizona. Ideally, that will happen. We'll have those folks come into the education space and view it as an avocation, perhaps, rather than simply a vocation. And then I would also point out university and employer partnerships. Christo Ray is kind of leading the way on the employer partnership side. I'm suggesting we probably need to kind of rethink college a little bit to maybe maximize the value of the college partnership side. For policymakers, there's some other implications here. The fight is going to sort of evolve from the education code fights to zoning, fire codes, local regulations, accreditation. There's going to be a whole new set of things that policymakers are going to be looking at and needing to be up to speed on. New kinds of partnerships sometimes require some policy changes, including registered apprenticeship programs. And I did a little research on this in a prior life. States could create alternatives to registered apprenticeship programs. And if they did so, they would be a little bit faster, a little bit less red tape, and a little bit more responsive to workforce needs. So it's something for states to think about. The other issues, of course, are going to be ongoing eligibility for ESA programs and the expansion of those programs, and of course, protection of providers from excessive regulation. For entrepreneurs and leaders in this new world, I think we need to encourage them to think about how do they create the conditions for choice to flourish. They need to, again, be thinking about specialized products, services, technology. All of these things need to come together, and there will be a market for them. For families, as I mentioned earlier, there's this larger backlash against institutions. There's a lack of trust in institutions, and K-12 is no exception to that. And so I think choice is kind of a response to that, and it's up to the people in this room and elsewhere who are creating these new institutions to not lose the trust of parents, that they've already lost in other institutions. We need to take that very seriously. It's the most precious thing any parent has, and so we need to not treat it as another product or service, but respect the dignity of each child. How are we meeting the moment at UATX? We're starting a new academic center, the Center for Education and Public Service, which is in the incubation phase now, that's built to equip undergraduates and practitioners for the challenges and opportunities I've outlined, and for the countless ones that we can't even imagine right now. We need teachers, we need policymakers and entrepreneurs who are ready to build, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. We are integrating practical preparation in teaching at a variety of local schools, very much inspired by what Krista's doing, so that our students get a sense for the different kinds of models of education that are going on in and around the Austin area. We want them to find the right fit for them after they leave us. We want them to know not only the history and philosophy of the competing philosophies of education, but we want them to learn cognitive science as well and the science of learning. And I know we're not alone. It's heartening to be here and joined in this effort by people here today that have gone before us and have done so with courage and excellence. And we are inspired by your efforts, and we're here to learn. And we hope that you'll be partners with us in the effort. I want to thank the amazing staff at the American Enterprise Institute, as well as our panelists and speakers today. If you have questions for any of us, please reach out. We're easy to get a hold of and always eager to help. And so thank you for your time today.